What if the greatest secrets of human history were never lost, only hidden in plain sight, buried inside forgotten manuscripts? Mysterious symbols and ancient writings are stories that may challenge everything we think we know about the past. Some texts have been decoded. Others continue to puzzle the world's greatest scholars. Tonight we'll uncover the most fascinating secrets hidden within these ancient pages and explore why some mysteries have survived for thousands of years. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another journey into history's greatest mysteries. Now let's open the oldest books in the world and discover what they were never meant to reveal. A dry wind moves across a ruined hillside where broken stones lie scattered beneath the morning light. There are no crowds, no kings, no voices left to explain what once happened here. A doorway opens into darkness, leading to a chamber that has remained sealed for thousands of years. Inside, beneath collapsed beams and centuries of dust, rests something far more fragile than gold. It is not a jeweled crown or a ceremonial weapon that changes history. It is a handful of cracked clay tablets, a bundle of brittle papyrus, or a scroll so blackened by fire that it appears beyond saving. At first glance they seem almost worthless, yet these silent objects possess a remarkable power. They are among the few surviving witnesses that can still speak for civilizations whose people vanished long ago. Every ancient text that survives has already defeated impossible odds. Unlike stone monuments that can stand for millennia, writing depends upon delicate materials that decay almost as soon as they are created. Papyrus crumbles in damp climates, leather rots, bamboo splits apart, ink fades beneath sunlight, wooden tablets burn. Even clay, which appears almost indestructible, breaks into thousands of fragments beneath earthquakes collapsing buildings or the footsteps of armies marching across abandoned cities. The survival of any ancient document is therefore less a certainty than an extraordinary accident. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Across the ancient world, countless generations devote enormous effort to recording what matters most to them. They write laws that define justice, contracts that record trade hymns offered to forgotten gods, letters between distant relatives, inventories of grain, lists of taxes, astronomical observations, medical treatments, and stories explaining how the world began. Most of these texts disappear forever. Their authors never imagine that one day nearly every copy will be gone, leaving only scattered survivors buried beneath deserts, hidden inside caves, or preserved by unusual conditions that no one could have predicted. The silence surrounding these lost writings creates one of history's greatest mysteries. Humanity knows that enormous libraries once existed, yet only tiny fragments remain. Entire civilizations undoubtedly produced millions of written records over centuries, but modern scholars often reconstruct those societies, using only a few thousand surviving documents, sometimes far fewer. It is like trying to understand an entire lifetime after finding only a handful of pages torn from a diary. This imbalance shapes nearly everything known about the ancient world. History often appears complete because books present smooth narratives filled with dates, rulers, and major events. The archaeological record tells a different story. Vast stretches remain blank. Every excavation reveals how much has disappeared rather than how much survives. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single explanation fully accounts for every silence found within the historical record. Sometimes nature becomes an unlikely guardian instead of a destroyer. In the scorching deserts of Egypt, the dry climate preserves papyrus for thousands of years because moisture never has the opportunity to consume it. In volcanic regions, catastrophic eruptions occasionally seal entire libraries beneath ash, protecting them from later decay, even while destroying the cities around them. Waterlogged wells, frozen mountain passes, sealed tombs, and isolated caves each create rare environments where writing escapes the ordinary fate of organic materials. Yet preservation alone is never enough. Someone must eventually discover these forgotten texts before time finishes the work that centuries began. Many discoveries happen almost by accident. Farmers digging foundations uncover buried tablets. Shepherds seeking lost animals stumble into hidden caves. Construction workers expose ancient walls that conceal long-forgotten archives. Archaeologists searching for one structure unexpectedly reveal another. Again and again, history advances because ordinary moments intersect with extraordinary luck. Even after discovery, another challenge begins. Ancient texts rarely emerge complete. More often, they resemble puzzles scattered across decades of excavation. One fragment preserves only several lines. Another contains a broken seal. A third survives with half its surface missing. Scholars spend years matching handwriting clay, composition fibre patterns, damaged edges, and linguistic clues to reunite pieces separated since antiquity. The process resembles assembling an immense mosaic after most of its stones have vanished forever. These discoveries also reveal something deeply human. Popular imagination often associates ancient writing with kings issuing grand proclamations or priests recording sacred ceremonies. Those documents certainly exist, but countless surviving texts concern surprisingly ordinary lives. Merchants complain about delayed shipments, officials calculate livestock, parents arrange marriages, workers receive wages measured in grain or beer. Students practice copying difficult symbols, making mistakes that remain visible thousands of years later. Someone complains about poor quality copper, another worries about unpaid debts. Such moments collapse the enormous distance between past and present. What survives in the record suggests that ancient civilizations were not filled solely with monumental achievements. They were also populated by individuals managing daily responsibilities remarkably familiar to modern readers. Behind every empire stood accountants, craftsmen, farmers, teachers, physicians, and families attempting to navigate ordinary existence. Their voices rarely dominate traditional history, yet ancient texts quietly restore them to view. There is another remarkable truth hidden within these fragile records. Many documents survive precisely because they were never intended to become historical treasures. Administrative archives often remain buried when government buildings collapse unexpectedly. Shopping receipts, tax records, legal contracts, and warehouse inventories escape destruction simply because no one considers them valuable enough to steal. Gold disappears into the hands of conquerors. Marble statues decorate new cities. Libraries burn. Meanwhile, a forgotten storage room filled with mundane paperwork becomes one of archaeology's greatest gifts. Scholars still debate how representative these surviving collections truly are. Entire regions leave almost no written evidence despite supporting complex societies for centuries. Some civilizations prefer oral tradition over extensive writing. Others write on materials that decay rapidly in humid climates, leaving almost nothing behind. In many cases, absence of evidence does not necessarily indicate absence of literacy. Instead, it reflects the unequal ways in which geography, climate, conflict, and chance determine what reaches the modern world. This uncertainty encourages caution. Every newly discovered text has the potential to reshape accepted history. A single inscription can identify an unknown ruler. A damaged letter may reveal an unexpected alliance between kingdoms. An overlooked economic record might demonstrate trade networks stretching far beyond previous assumptions. Archaeology repeatedly reminds researchers that historical certainty, often rests upon surprisingly fragile foundations. The ancient world therefore resembles an immense conversation interrupted by silence. Here and there, isolated voices continue speaking across thousands of years, but countless others have disappeared forever. The surviving texts do not tell the entire story. They cannot. Instead, they offer scattered windows into landscapes, beliefs, ambitions, fears, and achievements that would otherwise remain invisible. Every fragment invites careful interpretation, while also reminding us of everything that has already been lost beyond recovery. As more discoveries emerge from forgotten ruins, buried cities, desert caves, and submerged settlements, the picture slowly grows richer, without ever becoming complete. The greatest secret hidden inside ancient texts may not be a forgotten prophecy, a mysterious code, or the location of a lost kingdom. It may simply be the realization that humanity has recovered only a tiny fraction of its earliest written memory, while the overwhelming majority still lies hidden beneath the earth, dissolved by time or waiting silently for someone to uncover the next surviving voice from a world that refuses to be entirely forgotten. Long before great libraries fill palace walls or royal scribes carefully record the triumphs of kings' memory itself, exists as something fragile. It lives in human voices repeated around campfires, carried along trade routes, and passed from parents to children. Stories survive only because someone remembers them accurately. Laws depend upon elders who can recall every agreement. Genealogies stretch backward through generations because trained specialists preserve them in their minds. Songs become archives. Rituals become living books. Entire societies function without written words, demonstrating that civilization does not begin with writing but with memory. Yet memory has limits. Every generation introduces small changes. Details disappear, new interpretations emerge, distances grow between the original event and its retelling. As villages become towns and towns become cities, connected by expanding trade-spoken tradition alone can no longer manage the growing complexity of human life. Grain must be counted, taxes must be collected, property must be identified, agreements must survive beyond the lifespan of those who witnessed them. Administration demands permanence, and permanence gradually gives birth to writing. The earliest surviving examples are surprisingly modest. Rather than recording heroic epics or philosophical reflections, the first marks often concern practical necessities. Small clay tokens appear across parts of the ancient Near East thousands of years before recognizable writing develops. Each token represents quantities of livestock baskets of grain, jars of oil, or other valuable goods. Merchants and administrators use them as accounting tools in increasingly sophisticated economies. What begins as a simple counting system slowly evolves into something far more powerful. Eventually, instead of storing physical tokens, scribes impress symbols directly into wet clay. These impressions become standardized signs representing objects, numbers, and eventually sounds. Over generations, countless small innovations combine into one of humanity's greatest intellectual breakthroughs. Information no longer depends entirely upon living memory. Knowledge can outlive its creator. This transformation unfolds gradually rather than appearing all at once. Around the fertile river valleys of southern Mesopotamia, growing cities require increasingly detailed records. Temple economies manage enormous agricultural estates. Workers receive rations. Livestock numbers fluctuate. Harvests must be measured with remarkable precision. The earliest clay tablets reflect this practical world. They are administrative tools before they become literature. What survives in the archaeological records suggests that these first scribes occupy highly specialized positions within society. Learning hundreds of complex symbols demands years of education. Writing is not yet an everyday skill, but a professional discipline practiced by relatively few individuals. A trained scribe becomes indispensable, serving temples, rulers, merchants, and administrators whose authority increasingly depends upon accurate records. Across northeastern Africa, another remarkable tradition emerges along the banks of the Nile. Egyptian hieroglyphs appear not simply as practical notation, but also as visual art. Birds' hands, eyes, reeds, seated figures, and countless other carefully drawn signs decorate monuments while simultaneously conveying language. Writing here carries profound symbolic meaning. To carve words into stone is not merely to record information, but to give permanence to identity itself. Royal names enclosed within carved cartouches proclaim authority intended to endure for eternity. Elsewhere, different civilizations develop their own approaches. In ancient China, some of the earliest surviving inscriptions appear on oracle bones used during ritual divination. Questions concerning warfare, harvests, weather, or royal decisions are carved into bone or turtle shell before being subjected to intense heat. Cracks formed by fire are interpreted as messages, and the inscriptions preserve both the questions and, in many cases, their outcomes. These texts reveal a fascinating intersection between administration, religion, and political authority. In Mesoamerica, entirely separate writing traditions emerge without direct influence from the Old World. Civilizations such as the Maya develop extraordinarily sophisticated systems capable of recording history, astronomy, dynastic succession, mathematics, and religious belief. Their achievements remind modern scholars that writing is not the invention of one civilization spreading outward, but a solution discovered independently by different societies facing increasingly complex worlds. Despite these varied origins, remarkable similarities unite them. Writing consistently appears where communities become larger economies, more interconnected, and governments more organized. Population growth creates administrative challenges that spoken language alone cannot efficiently solve. Records reduce uncertainty, contracts preserve trust, calendars coordinate agriculture, inventories protect resources. Writing becomes one of civilization's most powerful technologies because it allows information to travel across both distance and time. The invention also changes how humans think about knowledge itself. Spoken words disappear the moment they are uttered. Written words remain. They can be revisited, corrected, compared, and accumulated across generations. A scribe can study ideas composed centuries earlier without ever meeting their author. This creates an entirely new relationship between the past and the present. Human understanding begins to build layer upon layer instead of restarting with each generation. Yet literacy remains extraordinarily limited for much of ancient history. Most people cannot read or write. Farmers cultivate fields, craftsmen shape metal, shepherds guide flocks, and merchants conduct business, while relying upon professional scribes whenever official documents become necessary. Literacy carries prestige precisely because it is rare. In many societies, scribes occupy respected positions that combine education, administration, and cultural influence. Archaeologists occasionally uncover the places where these individuals learn their demanding craft. Excavated school tablets preserve repeated exercises, copied symbols, mathematical calculations, and corrections made by instructors thousands of years ago. Some students practice the same signs dozens of times across the surface of wet clay. Others produce uneven handwriting that gradually improves with experience. Tiny mistakes remain permanently impressed into the tablets, offering intimate glimpses into classrooms that disappeared long before the rise of classical civilizations. These discoveries reveal that becoming a scribe requires patience rather than inspiration. Thousands of symbols must be memorized. Numerical systems demand accuracy. Formal styles differ from everyday language. Administrative formulas follow strict conventions. Behind every beautifully written inscription stand years of disciplined education, invisible to casual observers. As writing expands, it begins escaping its original administrative purpose. Religious hymns are copied with care. Royal victories are commemorated. Legal codes become standardized. Medical observations accumulate. Astronomical records stretch across generations, allowing patterns invisible within a single lifetime to become apparent. Literature gradually emerges, preserving myths, poems, wisdom, traditions, and reflections on mortality that continue speaking across millennia. Some of humanity's oldest surviving stories endure because anonymous scribes decide they are worth copying again and again. Every new copy becomes an act of preservation against inevitable decay. No manuscript lasts forever. Each generation must recreate the text if it wishes the knowledge to survive. This constant renewal creates both continuity and change. Small copying errors accumulate. Explanatory notes sometimes enter the main text. Regional traditions develop. Scholars still debate how closely surviving versions resemble their earliest originals. The evidence remains incomplete, yet one conclusion grows increasingly clear. Writing does far more than preserve information. It reshapes civilization itself. Governments expand because records become reliable. Trade flourishes because agreements can be documented. Religion develops stable traditions through sacred texts. Scientific observation accumulates across centuries instead of disappearing with individual observers. History itself becomes possible because events can be recorded close to the moment they occur rather than relying solely upon memory. Even so, every written tradition remains vulnerable. A city can burn, an archive can collapse beneath an earthquake, a dynasty may deliberately erase earlier records. The remarkable invention that allows humanity to preserve memory never guarantees that memory will survive. The earliest scribes cannot know that thousands of years later, only scattered fragments of their immense written world will remain waiting beneath layers of earth for future civilizations to rediscover the first enduring voices ever impressed into clay carved into stone, brushed onto papyrus, or etched into bone. The most tantalizing mysteries in the ancient world are not always hidden beneath collapsed temples or buried palaces. Sometimes they sit openly inside museum cases, their symbols carefully preserved behind glass visible to thousands of visitors every year. Every line, every carved mark, every repeated pattern can be examined in extraordinary detail, yet no one can say with certainty what they mean. The words are physically present, but the language itself has become silent. For historians, few experiences are more humbling than standing before a text that can be read with the eyes but not with the mind. These symbols are unmistakably intentional. Their creators understood them perfectly. Entire communities once exchanged ideas through these signs, wrote contracts, perhaps composed poetry, recorded rituals, or governed cities with them. Then over centuries the knowledge of how to read them disappeared so completely that modern civilization inherited only the visible shell of a forgotten language. Among the most famous examples is the script associated with the civilization that flourished across the Indus Valley more than 4,000 years ago. Stretching across parts of what are now Pakistan and northwestern India, this remarkable urban culture built carefully planned cities, engineered sophisticated drainage systems, standardized weights, and maintained long-distance trade networks that reached distant regions of Asia and the Persian Gulf. Archaeology reveals an organized and prosperous civilization, yet its written language remains one of history's greatest unsolved puzzles. Thousands of small inscriptions have been discovered on seals, pottery tools, and other objects. The symbols are elegant and surprisingly consistent. Certain signs appear repeatedly. Others occur only rarely. This regularity strongly suggests that the inscriptions follow meaningful rules rather than representing random decoration. Even so, the surviving texts are astonishingly brief. Most contain only a handful of symbols, often fewer than 10. Without longer documents, scholars possess very little context for interpreting their meaning. The challenge is made even greater by the absence of a bilingual inscription. When Egyptian hieroglyphs were eventually deciphered, researchers benefited enormously from the Rosetta Stone, which presented the same text in multiple writing systems. That fortunate discovery provided a bridge between a known language and an unknown one. Nothing comparable has yet been found for the Indus script. Every proposed solution must therefore rely almost entirely upon internal analysis and archaeological context. Over the decades, numerous theories have appeared. Some researchers argue that the script records an early Dravidian language. Others suggest connections with Indo-Aryan traditions or entirely separate linguistic families. A small number have even questioned whether the symbols represent full writing at all, proposing instead that they function more like administrative or religious identifiers. Scholars still debate these possibilities vigorously, and no single explanation has achieved broad acceptance within the academic community. What survives in the archaeological records suggests that the civilization itself was remarkably sophisticated, regardless of whether its writing is eventually deciphered. Streets intersect at carefully planned angles. Public sanitation reaches levels uncommon for the ancient world. Standardized bricks appear across enormous geographic distances. Trade extends across hundreds of kilometers, yet the thoughts of the people who built these cities remain almost entirely inaccessible because their script continues to resist interpretation. An equally fascinating mystery lies across the sea on the island of Crete. During the Bronze Age, the Minoan civilization develops magnificent palaces filled with colourful frescoes, elaborate storage facilities, workshops, ceremonial spaces and administrative offices. Their influence spreads widely throughout the eastern Mediterranean. Their artists create graceful images of dolphins, bull-leaping ceremonies, flowers and maritime life, unlike anything found elsewhere at the time. Hidden among these achievements is another undeciphered writing system known today as Linear A. Unlike the Indus inscriptions, many Linear A texts appear on clay tablets that preserve administrative records. The writing is extensive enough to reveal patterns in grammar, recurring terms, and numerical systems. Researchers understand how the signs are organized and can often pronounce them using values borrowed from a later script. Yet pronunciation alone provides little understanding if the underlying language remains unknown. This curious situation illustrates one of the greatest challenges in decipherment. Reading symbols aloud does not necessarily mean comprehending them. A person unfamiliar with modern Hungarian or Finnish might correctly pronounce every letter while understanding almost nothing of the meaning. Linear A presents a similar obstacle. Scholars can identify recurring sequences, recognize accounting practices and compare sign frequencies, but the language itself refuses to reveal its vocabulary. The mystery deepens because another script Linear B appears later in the same region. At first glance, the two writing systems seem closely related. Many signs resemble one another. For decades they resist interpretation together until an extraordinary breakthrough occurs during the 20th century. Linear B is eventually deciphered and proves to record an early form of Greek used by the Mycenaean civilization. The discovery transforms Bronze Age studies almost overnight. Administrative tablets suddenly become readable. Palace economies emerge in remarkable detail. Inventories of livestock, bronze weapons, textiles, perfumes, chariots, and religious offerings reveal the daily workings of complex kingdoms. Officials, craftsmen, priests, and farmers step out from anonymity through thousands of administrative records that had remained silent for centuries. Yet this success only sharpens the mystery surrounding Linear A. Because many of its symbols resemble those of Linear B researchers, initially hope that decipherment will quickly follow. Instead, the opposite occurs. Applying known sound values produces words that fail to match any recognized language. The evidence remains incomplete, suggesting that the Minoans speak a language distinct from later Greek. Without surviving descendants or bilingual inscriptions, the script remains locked. Elsewhere, other undeciphered systems continue to challenge researchers. The inscriptions of the ancient kingdom known as Proto-Elamite remain only partially understood despite decades of analysis. Symbols carved on the famous Phaistos disc provoke continuing debate regarding their purpose and authenticity, though many scholars caution against drawing sweeping conclusions from a single unique artifact. Short inscriptions from various Bronze Age cultures hint at writing traditions that vanish before leaving enough material for confident interpretation. Modern technology has introduced powerful new methods into this ancient puzzle. High-resolution digital imaging captures details invisible to the naked eye. Statistical analysis compares symbol frequencies across thousands of inscriptions. Artificial intelligence identifies recurring structural patterns that human observers might overlook. Three-dimensional scanning reconstructs damaged surfaces with extraordinary precision. These innovations accelerate research dramatically, yet they cannot replace the one ingredient that history has failed to preserve sufficient evidence. Every undeciphered script reminds us that writing alone does not guarantee communication across time. A text survives only if both its physical form and its cultural key endure together. Lose either one and the message becomes trapped inside its own symbols. The pages remain, the meaning disappears. There is quiet irony hidden within these forgotten scripts. Their creators almost certainly assume that writing will preserve their knowledge indefinitely. Instead, their civilizations collapse, languages evolve, and generations pass until no living person remembers how to read what once seemed perfectly ordinary. Thousands of years later, archaeologists recover the tablets with extraordinary care. Linguists devote entire careers to understanding them, and museums protect them as priceless treasures. Yet, despite all modern scholarship, countless ancient voices remain just beyond comprehension, patiently waiting for the discovery, or perhaps the single missing clue that may one day allow them to speak once more. While some ancient texts remain silent because no one can read their symbols, others speak with remarkable clarity. They reveal names, dates, transactions, prayers, disputes, victories, and disappointments in voices that feel unexpectedly familiar. Their existence depends not upon a miraculous decipherment, but upon an equally extraordinary accident of preservation. Entire archives survive beneath collapsed cities frozen in the final moments before disaster overtakes them. Instead of isolated inscriptions, archaeologists sometimes uncover thousands of tablets lying exactly where ancient scribes left them, transforming ruined buildings into time capsules of everyday civilization. One of the greatest examples emerges from the dry plains of northern Syria. In the 1970s, excavations at the ancient city of Ebla begin revealing what initially appears to be little more than the remains of administrative buildings. As archaeologists carefully remove layers of collapsed mud brick, they notice rows of clay tablets lying across the floors. The arrangement seems chaotic at first, but a closer examination reveals an unexpected pattern. Wooden shelves that once supported the archive have long since decayed. When the building collapses, the tablets fall almost straight downward, preserving much of the original organization of the library. The discovery eventually grows into one of the largest archives ever recovered from the ancient Near East. More than 17,000 tablets and fragments emerge from the ruins, many still grouped according to the shelves where scribes had organized them over 4,000 years earlier. It is as though an entire government office has been abandoned overnight, leaving its filing cabinets untouched until modern archaeology opens them again. The contents are astonishingly varied. There are diplomatic agreements, tax records, inventories of livestock, lists of workers, trade accounts, royal decrees, religious offerings, and lexical texts used to train scribes. Instead of presenting only the dramatic moments favoured by monuments, the archive reveals the quiet machinery that allows a kingdom to function every day. Grain moves from one warehouse to another. Wool is distributed to textile workshops. Officials calculate deliveries with meticulous precision. Messengers travel between distant cities carrying instructions that still survive in hardened clay. What survives in the records suggests that Ebla stands at the centre of an extensive commercial network. Goods arrive from forests hundreds of kilometres away. Precious metals, timber, textiles, oils, and crafted objects circulate through diplomatic and economic partnerships stretching across much of the ancient Near East. The tablets reveal not an isolated kingdom, but an interconnected world whose complexity rivals later civilizations often considered more advanced. Equally surprising is the sophistication of the scribes themselves. Many tablets are carefully categorized. Similar subjects are stored together. Educational texts appear alongside official documents, suggesting that scribal training takes place within the same administrative environment responsible for governing the kingdom. The archive functions not merely as storage but as an active centre of knowledge, where information is constantly produced, consulted, and expanded. The destruction that buries the city ironically guarantees the survival of its records. A catastrophic fire consumes the palace. Wooden beams collapse. Mud brick walls fall inward. Under ordinary circumstances, unfired clay tablets might eventually dissolve in rain, or be recycled into new construction. Instead, the intense heat of the blaze accidentally bakes many of them into durable ceramic. The disaster that destroys the archive simultaneously preserves it for more than 4 millennia. A similar story unfolds farther east in the ancient city of Nudzi, where archaeologists uncover thousands of tablets documenting the lives of ordinary families as much as royal officials. Legal contracts dominate many of the discoveries. Marriage agreements specify inheritance rights. Adoption records outline obligations between generations. Property disputes preserve the language of negotiation and compromise. Loans purchases and business partnerships reveal a society governed not only by rulers, but also by complex legal traditions. These documents illuminate aspects of daily life that monumental inscriptions almost never mention. A farmer leases land under carefully defined conditions. A merchant borrows silver for a trading expedition. Parents negotiate dowries intended to secure the future of their children. Servants receive wages. Craftsmen fulfill contracts. Women appear as property owners, witnesses, business participants, and legal actors in ways that challenge older assumptions about their roles in certain ancient societies. The evidence remains incomplete, but thousands of routine documents collectively paint a far richer portrait than isolated royal monuments ever could. Perhaps no archive better captures the human dimension of ancient writing than the royal correspondence discovered at Mari, situated along the Euphrates River. Here, more than 20,000 tablets emerge from palace ruins, preserving letters exchanged between governors, military commanders, diplomats, merchants, and members of the royal household. These letters possess an immediacy rarely found in formal inscriptions. Officials report failed harvests with growing concern. Military scouts describe enemy movements before battles begin. Provincial governors complain about shortages of supplies or difficulties collecting taxes. Couriers deliver urgent requests that reveal how slowly information travels across vast territories. Delays measured in days or weeks shape political decisions that modern communication would resolve within minutes. The personalities behind these letters gradually become visible. Some administrators write with remarkable efficiency. Others bury straightforward requests beneath elaborate formalities. Certain correspondents repeatedly express anxiety over the reliability of neighbouring rulers. Others display quiet confidence built upon years of experience. Without intending to create literature, these officials preserve individual voices across nearly 4,000 years. One recurring theme appears again and again throughout ancient archives' uncertainty. Contrary to the image of perfectly organized empires issuing flawless commands, governments constantly struggle with incomplete information. Harvest forecasts prove inaccurate. Floods interrupt transport. Messengers arrive late. Border disputes escalate unexpectedly. Disease affects livestock. Local officials misunderstand instructions. Ancient states are remarkably sophisticated, yet they remain vulnerable to the same unpredictability that challenges governments today. Another extraordinary archive emerges from the Hittite capital of Hattusa in central Anatolia. Tens of thousands of clay tablets preserve treaties, diplomatic correspondence, religious rituals, legal codes, myths, and historical accounts. Here scholars encounter one of the earliest known international peace treaties demonstrating that diplomacy between rival empires develops highly formalized procedures long before the classical world. The Hittite scribes also display a remarkable willingness to preserve foreign knowledge. Texts translated from neighboring cultures sit beside indigenous traditions. Religious rituals incorporate influences from conquered territories. Languages coexist within the archives, reflecting an empire that understands political power, often depends upon cultural adaptation as much as military strength. Scholars continue discovering subtle details hidden within these collections. Fingerprints accidentally impressed into wet clay by anonymous scribes remain visible under modern lighting. Seal impressions identify officials responsible for particular records. Corrections scratched into unfinished tablets reveal moments when scribes recognize mistakes before the clay dries. Tiny imperfections become intimate reminders that every document passes through human hands. No archive tells the complete story of an ancient civilization. Every collection reflects the priorities of the institution that creates it. Palace records emphasize administration. Temple archives preserve religious concerns. Private collections illuminate family life. Commercial documents focus on trade. The voices of many people, especially the poor, the illiterate, and the socially marginalized, often remain difficult to recover. Historians must therefore assemble broader narratives by combining evidence from many different sources while acknowledging the gaps that inevitably remain. Even so, these buried archives achieve something extraordinary. They restore motion to worlds that otherwise appear frozen in stone ruins. Cities once known only through broken walls suddenly become places filled with accountants balancing inventories, officials debating policy, teachers instructing students, merchants calculating profits, and families arranging their futures. The clay tablets do not simply record history. They reveal civilization in motion, captured in thousands of ordinary moments that together become one of archaeology's most powerful windows into the forgotten rhythms of the ancient world. Long before sacred texts become objects of devotion carried across continents, they begin as carefully copied manuscripts guarded within temples, palace sanctuaries, and secluded houses of learning. They are not created merely to preserve stories. They are intended to preserve order itself. In the minds of many ancient civilizations, the boundary between the natural and the supernatural is remarkably thin. The movement of stars, the flooding of rivers, the succession of kings, the health of crops, and the well-being of entire cities are believed to depend upon maintaining a proper relationship between humanity and unseen forces. Writing becomes one of the most powerful tools for protecting that relationship. Unlike administrative archives filled with inventories and tax records, sacred collections often serve multiple purposes at once. They preserve ritual instructions, record myths explaining the origin of the universe, describe ceremonies that must be performed with precision, and contain practical knowledge accumulated across generations. The distinction between religion, science, medicine, and government is far less rigid than it appears in the modern world. A priest observing the stars may also be recording agricultural calendars. A healer preparing herbal remedies may invoke divine protection while applying treatments derived from careful observation. A temple archive can therefore function simultaneously as a library and observatory, a medical repository and a political institution. Among the oldest surviving religious writings are the pyramid texts of ancient Egypt, carved directly onto the walls of royal burial chambers during the Old Kingdom. Unlike fragile papyrus scrolls, these inscriptions are literally built into stone architecture, ensuring that the words become part of the monument itself. Their purpose is not historical documentation, but spiritual guidance. The texts describe the king's journey into the afterlife, his transformation among the stars, and the rituals believed necessary to secure eternal existence. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that these inscriptions evolve over many generations. Later versions become increasingly elaborate, eventually appearing not only in royal pyramids, but also in coffins belonging to members of the elite. The knowledge that was once reserved almost exclusively for kings gradually spreads through broader segments of society. This slow expansion reflects changing ideas about death status and access to the divine. Yet even within these sacred writings, historians find surprisingly practical details. References to geography reveal ancient landscapes. Lists of offerings illuminate agricultural production. Descriptions of ceremonies preserve information about clothing architecture, music, and craftsmanship. Religious texts rarely exist in isolation from daily life. They quietly record countless aspects of the societies that produce them. Far to the east, ancient Mesopotamian temples accumulate their own remarkable collections. Here, ritual texts often exist alongside astronomical observations that stretch across centuries. Priests carefully monitor the movements of planets, eclipses, and unusual celestial events, believing that changes in the heavens reflect the intentions of the gods. Modern readers may distinguish sharply between astronomy and astrology, but ancient observers see them as inseparable. Careful measurement serves religious interpretation. These observations prove unexpectedly valuable to later generations. Babylonian astronomers record planetary movements with extraordinary consistency. Their long sequences of observations allow modern historians to reconstruct ancient skies and verify historical chronology with remarkable accuracy. Although the interpretations attached to these observations belong to ancient belief systems, the measurements themselves frequently demonstrate impressive precision. Medical texts preserved within Mesopotamian archives reveal a similar combination of careful observation and spiritual explanation. Treatments often include herbal remedies, dietary advice, and practical procedures alongside prayers or ritual formulas intended to remove supernatural causes of illness. Scholars still debate the relative importance assigned to each element, but the evidence suggests that ancient healers rely upon accumulated experience as well as religious tradition. Centuries of observation gradually produce extensive bodies of medical knowledge, even if that knowledge is expressed through cultural frameworks very different from modern medicine. Ancient Egypt likewise preserves medical papyri that continue to surprise researchers. Documents such as the Edwin Smith Papyrus describe injuries with an approach that often appears remarkably systematic. Head wounds, fractures, and spinal injuries are examined individually. Symptoms are observed carefully. Prognoses distinguish between conditions that are treatable, uncertain, or beyond recovery. While magical elements appear elsewhere in Egyptian medicine, certain texts reveal an equally strong tradition of empirical observation. The evidence remains incomplete, yet these manuscripts demonstrate that practical experience plays a significant role alongside religious belief. Across the Indian subcontinent, sacred literature develops extraordinary breadth over many centuries. The Vedas preserve hymns, rituals, philosophical reflections, and cosmological ideas transmitted orally for generations before eventually being committed to writing. Their preservation depends upon astonishing techniques of memorization. Specialized schools maintain exact recitation through carefully structured methods designed to minimize error. Writing eventually supplements this oral tradition rather than replacing it entirely. This coexistence of memory and manuscript highlights an important reality often overlooked in discussions of ancient texts. Writing does not automatically eliminate oral culture. Instead, the two systems frequently reinforce one another. Written manuscripts provide stability, while oral performance preserves pronunciation, rhythm, and interpretation. Together they create resilient traditions capable of surviving political upheaval, migration, and the passage of centuries. In ancient China, classical texts associated with philosophy, governance, ethics, and ritual likewise emerged through complex processes of compilation, editing, and transmission. Political turmoil repeatedly threatens these collections. Wars destroy libraries, dynasties collapse. Scholars flee with precious manuscripts hidden among their belongings. Some works survive because dedicated individuals memorize them when written copies are lost. Others are reconstructed from fragments after periods of widespread destruction. No single explanation fully accounts for how these traditions endure. Their survival reflects countless acts of preservation performed by anonymous copyists, teachers, students, priests, monks, and librarians whose names rarely appear in the historical record. Every generation must decide that these writings remain valuable enough to reproduce once again by hand, often requiring months or even years of meticulous labor. Copying itself becomes both a blessing and a challenge. Each manuscript extends the life of a text while simultaneously introducing opportunities for change. A tired scribe may accidentally omit a line. Marginal notes intended as commentary occasionally become incorporated into the main body by later copyists. Different regional traditions produce subtle variations. Modern textual scholars compare dozens or even hundreds of surviving manuscripts to reconstruct versions that most closely resemble earlier forms. The process resembles tracing the branches of an immense family tree whose oldest ancestors have long since disappeared. Temple libraries also preserve knowledge extending far beyond religious ritual. Agricultural calendars identify favorable planting seasons. Lists of medicinal plants record generations of practical experience. Mathematical tables assist in construction and taxation. Astronomical observations help regulate ceremonial festivals, while simultaneously advancing long-term understanding of celestial cycles. Sacred spaces become repositories of accumulated human knowledge because they are among the few institutions capable of preserving manuscripts across centuries. This concentration of knowledge also makes temples attractive targets during times of conflict. Invading armies recognize that destroying religious centers weakens political authority as well as spiritual identity. fires consume archives. Precious scrolls are looted or scattered. Monasteries decline through neglect after patronage disappears. History repeatedly demonstrates that knowledge preserved in a single location remains vulnerable regardless of its importance. Even so, fragments continue to survive. A damaged scroll hidden within a cave, a manuscript sealed inside a forgotten chamber, a bundle of papyrus overlooked by looters. Each rediscovery expands humanity's understanding not only of ancient religion, but also of science, medicine, literature, governance, and the countless ways these fields once existed together rather than apart. Beneath the prayers and rituals, ancient sacred texts preserve a broader story, the story of civilizations attempting to understand both the visible world around them and the invisible forces they believed shaped every aspect of existence. Ancient texts rarely survive in the exact form in which they are first written. Every civilization inherits stories from those who come before it, but inheritance is rarely passive. New rulers reshape old traditions. Priests revise sacred histories. Victorious kings erase defeated rivals from official memory. Scribes copy earlier records while quietly adjusting names, dates, or political interpretations to fit the realities of their own age. As a result, history often reaches the present, not as an untouched record, but as a carefully edited conversation spanning centuries. The process begins almost as soon as writing itself becomes an instrument of power. A ruler who controls official archives also influences how future generations remember the past. Monumental inscriptions celebrate victories while minimizing defeats. Royal genealogies emphasize legitimate succession and quietly overlook inconvenient claimants. Building inscriptions credit new kings with restoring temples whose foundations may have been laid generations earlier. None of this necessarily reflects deliberate deception in the modern sense. Ancient societies often view history as something that should reinforce order, legitimacy, and divine favor, rather than serve as a neutral chronicle of every event. One of the clearest examples appears in ancient Egypt, where the memory of certain pharaohs is deliberately altered after their deaths. The reign of Hatshepsut, one of Egypt's most successful female rulers, demonstrates how fragile official memory can become. During her lifetime, she oversees ambitious building projects, expands trade, and governs with considerable effectiveness. Yet years after her death, many of her statues are broken, her names removed from monuments and portions of her public image systematically erased. Scholars still debate the precise motivations behind this campaign. Some suggest it reflects political efforts to strengthen the legitimacy of later rulers. Others argue that restoring a more conventional line of male succession becomes increasingly important as dynastic politics evolve. Whatever the reason, the archaeological evidence reveals that memory itself can become a battlefield. Had enough monuments been destroyed, historians might never have understood the true scale of Hatshepsut's reign. Fortunately, complete erasure proves remarkably difficult. Hidden inscriptions survive in temples overlooked by later workers. Statues buried beneath collapsed buildings escape destruction. Administrative records preserve names omitted from monumental texts. By comparing multiple sources, archaeologists gradually reconstruct a history that official memory attempts to suppress. The evidence remains incomplete, but it demonstrates how fragile historical truth can become when political interests shape the written record. A similar pattern appears across Mesopotamia. Assyrian kings commission magnificent inscriptions describing military campaigns with extraordinary confidence. Long lists of conquered cities, captured prisoners, and tribute collected from distant lands reinforce royal authority throughout the empire. These records contain invaluable historical information, Yet they also reflect carefully constructed political narratives. Military setbacks rarely receive equal attention. Campaigns ending without decisive victory may be summarized briefly or omitted altogether. Rebellions are described after they have already been crushed. Internal political disagreements receive little discussion. The resulting inscriptions communicate genuine historical events, while presenting them through the perspective of rulers seeking to demonstrate divine favor and military strength. This tendency does not make the texts unreliable. Instead, it requires careful interpretation. Modern historians compare royal inscriptions with archaeological evidence, foreign accounts, administrative documents, and environmental data. Together, these different forms of evidence often produce a far more balanced understanding than any single source could provide alone. Perhaps nowhere is the rewriting of history more visible than in ancient Rome. Roman historians inherit centuries of earlier traditions while simultaneously serving powerful political systems. During periods of civil war and imperial transition, official memory becomes increasingly important. Emperors seek legitimacy not only through military success but also through control of historical narrative. One remarkable practice illustrates this clearly: the formal condemnation of memory. In certain cases, individuals who fall dramatically from political favor become subject to what modern scholars refer to as damnatio memoriae. Although the exact legal application varies, the practical effect is unmistakable. Statues are destroyed, names are chiseled from inscriptions, portraits are altered, public recognition disappears wherever possible. Yet paradoxically, these attempts often preserve the memory they intend to erase. An inscription with one carefully removed name immediately signals that someone important once occupied that position. Empty spaces become historical evidence in their own right. Archaeologists examining damaged monuments can frequently identify deliberate erasures, and through comparison with surviving records reconstruct the identities of those who are meant to be forgotten. Religious transformation also reshapes ancient texts in profound ways. As belief systems evolve, older traditions are frequently copied, interpreted or adapted rather than simply discarded. Pagan temples become churches in some regions. Earlier myths influence later literature. Local traditions merge with expanding religions. Scribes preserve ancient stories while framing them through new theological perspectives. This gradual adaptation creates extraordinarily rich textual traditions, but also introduces additional layers of complexity for modern scholarship. Determining the earliest form of a story often requires comparing manuscripts separated by hundreds of years. Later editors may preserve older material almost unchanged in one passage, while extensively revising another. The boundaries between preservation and reinterpretation become increasingly difficult to identify. Translation introduces another subtle form of transformation. Ancient texts frequently travel across linguistic boundaries as empires expand and cultures interact. Every translation requires choices. Some words possess no exact equivalent. Cultural concepts resist simple substitution. Idioms lose their original nuance. Translators inevitably interpret as well as transmit. The famous Greek translation of Hebrew scriptures known as the Septuagint demonstrates both the value and the complexity of this process. It allows ancient traditions to reach entirely new audiences, profoundly influencing later intellectual and religious history. At the same time, scholars comparing Greek and Hebrew versions identify differences that illuminate centuries of textual development. Neither version can simply replace the other. Together they reveal the dynamic life of ancient manuscripts. Even administrative texts undergo unexpected revision. New dynasties frequently inherit archives created by earlier governments. Existing tax systems continue with updated rulers' names. Legal precedents remain useful despite political change. Scribes occasionally copy older documents to preserve fading originals, introducing small errors or modernization along the way. What appears to be a single document may therefore represent centuries of copying and recopying. The evidence also suggests that some ancient scholars are fully aware of these challenges. In several traditions, scribes include notes explaining damaged passages, uncertain readings, or missing sections inherited from earlier copies. These annotations reveal remarkable intellectual honesty. Rather than pretending perfect certainty, they acknowledge the limitations of the materials available to them. Their efforts anticipate many principles that continue guiding historical scholarship today. Modern technology has made it possible to detect revisions invisible for centuries. Multispectral imaging reveals erased writing beneath later editions. Chemical analysis distinguishes inks produced during different periods. Microscopic examination identifies separate stages of manuscript production. Radiocarbon dating provides independent estimates for the age of writing materials. Each scientific advance allows researchers to peel back additional layers of textual history without damaging the precious artifacts themselves. No single explanation fully accounts for every alteration found within ancient texts. Some changes are accidental, others are political, religious, linguistic, or practical. Most emerge through ordinary human decisions made over generations rather than dramatic conspiracies. The result is a written record that resembles a living organism more than a frozen monument. It grows, adapts, loses parts of itself, and acquires new layers with time. Rather than diminishing the value of ancient texts, this complexity makes them even more remarkable. They preserve not only the events they describe, but also the evolving ways successive civilizations understand, reinterpret, and remember those events. Every erased name, every corrected line, every translated phrase, and every carefully copied manuscript reminds us that history is never simply inherited. It is continually rewritten by the people, determined to preserve it, reshape it, or sometimes make it disappear altogether. For centuries, forgotten scripts sit in plain sight. Travelers sketch mysterious inscriptions from ruined temples. Collectors carry carved stones back to Europe. Explorers copy symbols from weathered monuments without understanding a single word. Entire museums gradually fill with texts that no one can read. The shapes are beautiful, their craftsmanship undeniable, yet they remain little more than elaborate decoration. Historians know these writings contain immense knowledge, but without the key to their language, they are no more informative than an unopened book. The challenge of decipherment is unlike solving an ordinary puzzle. In most puzzles, the pieces are complete and the rules are known. Ancient writing offers neither certainty. Entire sections are missing. Languages may have no living descendants. Pronunciation is uncertain. Grammar is invisible. Even identifying where one word ends and another begins can prove unexpectedly difficult. Every successful decipherment therefore combines archaeology, linguistics, mathematics, history, and an extraordinary measure of patience. The first essential question is deceptively simple. Does the writing represent sounds, complete words, syllables, ideas, or some combination of all four? Modern readers instinctively assume that alphabets are natural because they use them every day. Ancient writing systems often function very differently. Egyptian hieroglyphs combined phonetic signs with symbols representing complete ideas and determinatives that clarify meaning without being spoken aloud. Cuneiform evolves through multiple languages while retaining many of its original signs. Chinese characters preserve another entirely different tradition. Every script demands its own logic before translation can even begin. Among history's greatest breakthroughs stands the decipherment of Egyptian hieroglyphs. For many centuries after the decline of ancient Egyptian civilization, the knowledge of reading these magnificent inscriptions disappears completely. Greek and Roman authors speculate about their meaning, often believing the symbols represent purely mystical concepts rather than ordinary language. Renaissance scholars continue searching for hidden philosophical messages inside every carved bird eye or seated figure. The true nature of the script remains concealed beneath centuries of misunderstanding. Everything changes because of a single remarkable object discovered during Napoleon's Egyptian campaign in 1799. The Rosetta Stone contains one decree written 3 times, once in Greek, once in Demotic, and once in hieroglyphs. At first, even this extraordinary artifact does not immediately unlock the mystery. It simply provides the possibility of comparison. The Greek text can already be read. Scholars therefore know the general content of the inscription. The challenge lies in matching known ideas to unknown symbols. Numerous researchers contribute important observations during the following decades, but the decisive breakthrough emerges through the work of the French scholar Jean-François Champollion. Champollion recognizes something many earlier researchers overlook. Hieroglyphs are not merely symbolic pictures expressing abstract ideas. They also represent sounds. Royal names enclosed within oval cartouches become especially important, because their identities can often be inferred from the Greek text. By comparing repeated patterns associated with names such as Ptolemy and Cleopatra, Champollion gradually identifies phonetic values for individual signs. The process demands astonishing persistence. Every successful identification creates new possibilities while also introducing new questions. Some signs function alphabetically, others represent syllables, still others convey complete words or classify surrounding terms. Egyptian writing proves to be a highly sophisticated system that cannot be reduced to any single principle. Once the basic structure becomes understood, thousands of monuments suddenly begin speaking again after nearly 15 centuries of silence. Temple walls reveal religious ceremonies in remarkable detail. Tomb inscriptions identify families whose names have been forgotten for millennia. Administrative records illuminate taxation, labor organization, and diplomacy. Personal letters expose ordinary concerns that sound surprisingly modern. Entire dynasties emerge with greater clarity because their own words finally become readable. The decipherment transforms Egyptology almost overnight. Before this achievement, much of Egyptian history depends upon Greek historians and archaeological interpretation. Afterwards, the Egyptians themselves begin telling their own story, through inscriptions left across temples, tombs, statues, papyri, and monuments throughout the Nile Valley. A similarly dramatic breakthrough occurs during the 19th century, with the decipherment of cuneiform. Unlike hieroglyphs, cuneiform presents an entirely different challenge. Thousands upon thousands of wedge-shaped impressions cover clay tablets excavated from Mesopotamia. The script has been adapted across multiple civilizations, including the Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, and others. The same signs often carry different meanings depending upon language and historical period. One key figure in this achievement is Henry Rawlinson, whose determination becomes almost legendary. High up on a steep cliff at Behistun in present-day Iran stands a monumental inscription, commissioned by the Persian king Darius the Great. The text appears in 3 languages written in cuneiform. Reaching portions of the inscription requires dangerous climbing along narrow ledges hundreds of feet above the ground. Rawlinson painstakingly copies the inscriptions despite considerable personal risk. Like the Rosetta Stone, the Behistun inscription provides multiple versions of essentially the same message. Old Persian proves the easiest to decipher because its writing system is comparatively straightforward. Once scholars understand Old Persian, it becomes possible to approach the far more complex Elamite and Babylonian versions. The consequences are extraordinary. Vast archives excavated across Mesopotamia suddenly become accessible. The Epic of Gilgamesh emerges from obscurity, revealing one of humanity's oldest surviving literary masterpieces. Legal codes, diplomatic correspondence, astronomical records, economic documents, royal chronicles, and scientific observations collectively revolutionize understanding of the ancient Near East. What survives in the record suggests that many assumptions held before decipherment prove incomplete or entirely incorrect. Civilizations previously known only through references in biblical or classical sources suddenly possess their own voices. Historians no longer rely exclusively upon outside observers. They can compare multiple perspectives, identify biases, and reconstruct events with far greater confidence. Not every decipherment depends upon spectacular monuments. Sometimes progress comes through countless small observations accumulated over decades. Linguists analyze recurring patterns. Archaeologists establish reliable dating. Computer algorithms identify statistical regularities invisible to human inspection. Specialists compare names of places, rulers, and deities across neighboring cultures. Every clue contributes to a gradually expanding framework of understanding, yet even successful decipherments remain works in progress. Knowing how to read individual words does not automatically guarantee perfect interpretation. Ancient idioms, cultural references, humor, legal customs, and religious symbolism often remain difficult to reconstruct. Scholars continue debating the precise meanings of many passages long after the underlying language has become readable. The evidence remains incomplete because language itself constantly changes. Words shift meaning across generations. Technical vocabulary evolves. Regional dialects introduce variation. Ancient scribes occasionally employ poetic expressions or rare terms that appear nowhere else. Decipherment, therefore, marks not the end of the investigation, but the beginning of deeper interpretation. Modern technology continues accelerating this work. Artificial intelligence assists researchers by comparing enormous textual databases within seconds. Machine learning identifies scribal habits across thousands of tablets. Digital reconstruction virtually reunites broken fragments scattered among museums on different continents. Multispectral photography reveals faded ink invisible under ordinary light. Three-dimensional scanning records surface details with microscopic precision, preserving fragile inscriptions for future generations. Even so, every decipherment ultimately depends upon something profoundly human curiosity sustained over decades. No machine experiences the quiet excitement of recognizing that two damaged fragments belong together after centuries apart. No algorithm feels the significance of hearing a civilization speak again for the first time in thousands of years. Behind every breakthrough stand researchers willing to dedicate entire careers to understanding voices long believed permanently lost. Their success reminds us that ancient texts are never truly silent forever. Some wait patiently for the right inscription, the right comparison, or the right insight. Others continue resisting every attempt at interpretation, preserving mysteries that may endure for generations yet to come. Between those two possibilities lies one of archaeology's most compelling pursuits, the patient search for the forgotten keys that allow the distant past to speak once more in its own unmistakable voice. Ancient maps rarely resemble the precise charts displayed on modern navigation systems. Coastlines curve in unfamiliar ways, mountains are exaggerated or compressed. Rivers wander across parchment with uncertain confidence, while distant lands sometimes fade into empty space filled with symbolic creatures, or brief notes from travelers who never actually visit the places they describe. At first glance, these imperfections may suggest that ancient geography is little more than imagination. Yet hidden within many of these old maps and travel accounts are remarkable clues to landscapes that have since been transformed beyond recognition. Unlike monuments built from stone, landscapes never remain still. Rivers change course, forests become farmland, wetlands dry into plains, coastlines retreat beneath rising seas or extend outward as sediment accumulates. Entire lakes disappear. Volcanic eruptions reshape valleys within hours. Earthquakes lift shorelines several meters above the sea. Over centuries, these gradual and sudden changes alter the physical world so profoundly that places described in ancient texts sometimes appear impossible to locate. For archaeologists, old geographical records therefore serve a purpose far greater than simple navigation. They preserve snapshots of environments that no longer exist. Even when their measurements are imperfect, they often contain observations capable of guiding modern discoveries. Among the most influential ancient geographers is Claudius Ptolemy, whose work during the 2nd century preserves one of the most ambitious attempts to describe the known world. His Geographia compiles thousands of place names with estimated coordinates based upon reports gathered from merchants, soldiers, administrators, and earlier scholars. Although many of these coordinates contain substantial errors, the work introduces an extraordinary idea: the world can be represented systematically through mathematical relationships rather than purely symbolic illustrations. Ptolemy never claims perfect accuracy. The information available to him varies enormously in quality. Some regions are described by experienced surveyors, others depend upon travellers' estimates accumulated across generations. Distances measured along winding trade routes are often converted imperfectly into straight-line coordinates. Even so, his work preserves geographical knowledge that later civilizations continue studying for centuries. Modern researchers, comparing his descriptions with archaeological evidence, occasionally discover settlements that had disappeared from collective memory. A river crossing mentioned briefly in an ancient itinerary may correspond to ruins uncovered beneath modern farmland. A forgotten harbour recorded by Roman merchants can lead marine archaeologists towards submerged structures, now hidden beneath coastal sediments. The evidence remains incomplete, but time and again, ancient geography proves more reliable than it first appears. Perhaps nowhere is this relationship between text and landscape more striking than around the Mediterranean coastline. Classical writers describe ports bustling with commerce, protected by harbours that today lie far inland or beneath the sea. At first, these accounts seem contradictory. How can a harbour exist where no water remains? Geology provides the answer. Rivers gradually deposit enormous quantities of sediment into coastal bays. Over centuries, shorelines migrate outward. Ancient harbours slowly fill with mud until ships can no longer enter. Cities once located directly beside the sea eventually stand kilometres from the nearest coastline. Archaeologists studying old texts alongside sediment cores reconstruct these transformations with remarkable precision. The famous city of Ephesus illustrates this process beautifully. During antiquity, it serves as one of the eastern Mediterranean's great maritime centres. Merchants arrive from across the Roman world. Massive ships unload cargo at busy quays. Today, visitors walking through its spectacular ruins find themselves surrounded not by waves, but by fertile plains extending toward a distant shoreline. The harbour described in ancient texts has vanished beneath centuries of river deposits, silently confirming rather than contradicting the historical record. Other landscapes undergo even more dramatic change. Ancient writers occasionally describe rivers flowing through regions that are now arid desert. For generations, such accounts are dismissed as exaggerations or errors. Modern satellite imagery, however, reveals buried river channels stretching beneath the sands of the Sahara and Arabian deserts. These fossil waterways confirm that climates across northern Africa and the Middle East have shifted dramatically over thousands of years. What survives in the geological record suggests that portions of today's Sahara once supported grasslands, lakes, abundant wildlife, and human communities whose existence depended upon far wetter conditions. Rock art depicting giraffes, elephants, hippopotamuses, and cattle aligns closely with environmental evidence recovered from ancient lake beds. Texts mentioning greener landscapes therefore preserve genuine memories of ecological worlds long since transformed by changing climate. Travel accounts likewise preserve valuable environmental observations. Merchants crossing mountain passes describe glaciers larger than those visible today. Pilgrims record forests that later disappear through logging and agricultural expansion. Roman engineers document rivers before dams alter their flow. Chinese chronicles describe shifting courses of the Yellow River that repeatedly reshape entire regions. Although these authors seldom intend to write environmental history, their observations become indispensable centuries later. Ancient maps also preserve evidence of political geography that physical archaeology alone cannot easily recover. Roads connecting distant settlements reveal patterns of trade. Lists of frontier stations identify strategic military positions. Itineraries recording daily travel distances help researchers estimate the locations of missing towns. Even when individual measurements contain errors, the broader network often remains surprisingly coherent. One remarkable example comes from the Roman road system. Documents such as the Antonine itinerary and the Peutinger map list routes extending across thousands of kilometers. These records allow archaeologists to identify forgotten settlements, reconstruct transportation networks, and understand how information armies and commerce moved through one of history's largest empires. The Peutinger map itself appears almost bewildering to modern eyes. Instead of preserving realistic proportions, it stretches the known world into a long horizontal strip, emphasizing roads rather than geographic accuracy. Mountains, rivers, and cities are arranged according to practical travel rather than cartographic precision. Yet this apparent distortion reflects its purpose perfectly. It functions less as a modern map than as an ancient transportation guide prioritizing connections over appearance. Not all ancient geographical texts concern land alone. Maritime records preserve equally valuable information. Greek sailors describe seasonal winds across the Indian Ocean. Arab navigators record currents, reefs, and safe anchorages. Polynesian traditions preserve astonishing knowledge of stars wave patterns and ocean swells that allow navigation across immense distances without written charts. These different traditions reveal multiple ways of understanding space, each adapted to its cultural environment. Scholars still debate the accuracy of certain famous geographical accounts. Some descriptions appear to combine first-hand observation with hearsay collected from distant travellers. Others blend mythology and reality in ways that remain difficult to separate completely. Creatures never observed by modern science occasionally appear alongside entirely accurate descriptions of coastlines and mountain ranges. Rather than dismissing these texts outright, historians examine each element individually, comparing literary traditions with archaeological and environmental evidence. Modern technology has transformed this process dramatically. Satellite imagery penetrates dense forests to reveal hidden structures matching ancient descriptions. Airborne laser scanning identifies buried roads beneath vegetation. Underwater archaeology investigates submerged harbours mentioned in classical writings. Geographic information systems compare ancient itineraries with reconstructed landscapes. Every technological advance strengthens the dialogue between surviving texts and the physical world. Perhaps the greatest lesson offered by these ancient maps is one of humility. Landscapes that appear permanent within a single human lifetime are remarkably dynamic across centuries. Rivers migrate, seas advance and retreat, civilizations adapt, flourish, and disappear as environments evolve around them. The old texts preserve fleeting moments within this continual transformation, reminding us that geography is not a fixed stage upon which history unfolds. It is an active participant constantly reshaping the possibilities available to every generation that attempts to leave its own mark upon the world. Ancient texts are often approached as windows into mythology, religion, or political history, yet some of their most remarkable secrets lie hidden in passages that appear almost ordinary. A list of stars observed over several nights, a farmer's note describing an unusually late flood, instructions for constructing a canal, measurements scratched into the margin of a mathematical tablet. For centuries, such details attract little attention outside narrow scholarly circles. Only when modern science begins comparing these records with evidence from archaeology, geology, astronomy, and climatology does their extraordinary value become fully apparent. The people who compose these documents are not attempting to write scientific papers in the modern sense. They simply observe the world around them because their survival depends upon understanding its patterns. Farmers must anticipate seasonal rains. Sailors must navigate changing winds. Temple officials regulate calendars according to celestial movements. Builders calculate angles and weights. Physicians compare symptoms across generations. Their accumulated observations, preserved almost by accident within ancient manuscripts, become one of humanity's longest continuous records of the natural world. Few examples demonstrate this better than Babylonian astronomy. Beginning many centuries before the Common Era, Mesopotamian scholars carefully record the positions of the moon planets and prominent stars with astonishing regularity. Night after night, generation after generation, observations are added to existing collections. Their immediate purpose is often connected with religious interpretation and royal decision-making, but the precision of the measurements extends far beyond symbolism. Modern astronomers have repeatedly compared these ancient observations with mathematical models of planetary motion. In many cases, the agreement is remarkably close. Records of lunar eclipses, planetary conjunctions, and unusual celestial events provide valuable chronological anchors that help historians date ancient reigns and major historical events with surprising accuracy. The discipline required to produce these records is extraordinary. Observers must work under clear skies, maintain consistent methods, and preserve earlier observations so that meaningful patterns can emerge. What survives in the record suggests that these astronomical traditions continue across centuries, creating one of the longest uninterrupted scientific enterprises in human history. Ancient Egypt offers another fascinating example through its intimate relationship with the annual flooding of the Nile. Long before modern hydrology, Egyptian officials recognized that the river's seasonal rise determines the prosperity of the entire kingdom. Scribes carefully document flood levels, harvest outcomes, and administrative responses. These records allow governments to estimate taxation, organize food storage, and prepare for years of abundance or scarcity. Today, climatologists and historians compare these ancient measurements with geological evidence and tree ring data from surrounding regions. The combined evidence reveals periods of prolonged drought, unusually strong floods, and environmental fluctuations that influence political stability. The collapse or weakening of certain dynasties appears increasingly connected to changing climate rather than military defeat alone. No single explanation fully accounts for these complex events, but ancient records provide essential pieces of the puzzle. Mathematics also occupies a surprisingly practical place within many ancient manuscripts. Egyptian papyri preserve methods for calculating areas, volumes, and construction problems. Babylonian clay tablets contain sophisticated numerical exercises that demonstrate an impressive understanding of geometry and algebraic reasoning. Rather than pursuing mathematics as an abstract discipline, ancient scholars often develop these techniques to solve practical problems involving architecture, irrigation, taxation, and trade. One particularly remarkable aspect of Babylonian mathematics is its use of a base 60 numerical system. Although unfamiliar today, this approach proves extraordinarily flexible for many calculations. Its legacy survives quietly in modern life, whenever clocks divide hours into 60 minutes, or circles into 360 degrees. A mathematical tradition developed thousands of years ago continues shaping everyday experience without most people ever realizing its ancient origins. Engineering knowledge preserved in ancient texts reveals similar sophistication. Roman writers describe aqueduct construction, road-building bridge design, and mechanical devices with remarkable detail. Vitruvius' writing during the 1st century before the Common Era compiles extensive discussions of architecture materials, proportions, acoustics, water management, and urban planning. Although portions of his work reflect the assumptions of his own time, many practical observations remain recognizable to engineers today. Elsewhere, Chinese technical manuscripts preserve detailed discussions of metallurgy, agriculture, hydraulics, and mechanical invention. Innovations such as sophisticated iron production, canal engineering, and early seismological instruments emerge from traditions that combine careful observation with generations of accumulated experience. These texts remind modern readers that scientific and technological creativity develops simultaneously across multiple civilizations rather than following a single geographical pathway. Medical manuscripts perhaps illustrate the blending of observation and inherited knowledge more clearly than any other category of ancient writing. Physicians in Greece, Egypt, India, China, and Mesopotamia each compile collections of symptoms, treatments, dietary advice, and surgical procedures. Their explanations for disease often differ dramatically from modern biology, yet their careful documentation of injuries, illnesses, and patient outcomes frequently demonstrates remarkable empirical attention. The writings traditionally associated with Hippocrates emphasize systematic clinical observation rather than supernatural intervention alone. Patients are examined carefully, symptoms are described in detail, environmental conditions receive attention alongside physical signs. While many ancient medical theories are later replaced by new discoveries, the commitment to observing patients closely establishes habits of inquiry that influence medicine for centuries. Ancient agricultural texts likewise preserve valuable environmental knowledge. Roman authors such as Cato Varro and Columella discuss crop rotation, soil management, livestock breeding, irrigation, and seasonal timing. Chinese agricultural manuals describe techniques adapted to diverse climates and landscapes. These works are not static collections of tradition, but evolving compilations shaped by practical experience gathered over generations. What survives in the archaeological record increasingly confirms many of these observations. Ancient farmers understand local ecosystems with impressive sophistication. They recognize subtle differences in soil quality, rainfall patterns, and seasonal variation long before modern ecology develops as a scientific discipline. Their methods are not universally successful, nor are they immune to environmental miscalculation, but they often display remarkable adaptability. One lesser-known area where ancient texts continue proving valuable involves natural disasters. Historical accounts describing earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, floods, droughts, and unusual weather events provide important evidence for modern geologists and climate scientists. A brief mention of a devastating earthquake within an ancient chronicle may help identify previously unknown seismic activity. Descriptions of volcanic ash falling across distant regions contribute to reconstructing the chronology of major eruptions. Scholars still debate the precise interpretation of some environmental records because literary exaggeration occasionally complicates the evidence. Ancient authors may emphasize dramatic language when describing disasters. Even so, careful comparison with ice cores, sediment layers, tree rings, and archaeological data often reveals surprising agreement. The combination of textual and scientific evidence produces a far more complete understanding than either could achieve independently. Perhaps the most profound lesson emerging from these ancient writings is that knowledge rarely develops in isolation. Astronomy influences agriculture. Mathematics improves engineering. Religious calendars encourage careful celestial observation. Trade stimulates geographical exploration. Medicine borrows from botany. Every field grows through constant interaction with others. The ancient world does not separate knowledge into modern academic disciplines. Instead, observation, craftsmanship, philosophy, religion, and practical experience exist within a single, interconnected intellectual landscape. Temple priests observe planets while organizing calendars. Architects calculate geometry while constructing monuments dedicated to the gods. Farmers become skilled climatologists because their harvests depend upon understanding weather. Across thousands of years, these quiet observations accumulate within fragile manuscripts, clay tablets, bamboo strips, and papyrus scrolls. Their creators cannot know that future generations will compare their notes with satellites, supercomputers, and laboratory analysis. Yet again and again, modern science discovers that hidden among prayers, legal codes, royal decrees, and epic narratives are careful observations of the natural world, observations that continue speaking with remarkable clarity across the immense distance of time. Knowledge accumulates slowly, often over centuries, but it can disappear with terrifying speed. A library that requires generations to assemble may be reduced to ash within a single afternoon. Shelves filled with carefully copied manuscripts can collapse beneath invading armies, accidental fires, earthquakes, floods, or simple neglect. Ancient texts repeatedly remind us that preserving knowledge is never a permanent achievement. Every civilization inherits the responsibility of protecting what previous generations struggled to create, and history shows how easily that responsibility can fail. The destruction of libraries has become one of the most enduring symbols of cultural loss. Yet the reality is often more complicated than popular imagination suggests. Rather than one dramatic catastrophe erasing an entire civilization's memory, overnight knowledge usually disappears through a long chain of smaller events. Political instability interrupts copying. Economic decline reduces support for scholars. Buildings deteriorate. Insects damage manuscripts. Religious change shifts attention toward new collections while older works quietly decay. By the time flames finally consume a library, much of its contents may already have been scattered, neglected, or copied elsewhere. No ancient library has captured the imagination more powerfully than the Library of Alexandria. Founded during the reign of the Ptolemaic rulers in Egypt, it becomes one of the most ambitious intellectual institutions of the ancient world. The vision behind it is extraordinary. Instead of preserving only local traditions, its founders seek to gather writings from across the known world. Greek philosophy, Egyptian knowledge, Babylonian astronomy, medical treatises, dramatic literature, mathematics, geography, and historical records are collected under one roof. Ancient writers describe agents acquiring manuscripts from visiting ships entering Alexandria's harbour. Copies are made by skilled scribes, while original texts are sometimes retained for the library itself. Although some of these stories may contain elements of exaggeration, they reflect the institution's extraordinary reputation. Alexandria is not merely a building filled with scrolls, it is a centre where scholars compare traditions, debate ideas, translate foreign works, and expand humanity's collective understanding. Among the scholars associated with Alexandria are some of antiquity's greatest intellectual figures. Euclid develops foundational works in geometry. Eratosthenes estimates the circumference of the Earth with remarkable accuracy, using observations of shadows and careful mathematical reasoning. Aristarchus proposes that the Earth moves around the Sun centuries before such ideas gain widespread acceptance. Physicians, linguists, poets, and historians all contribute to an atmosphere unlike anything previously attempted on such a scale. Because of its legendary status, the library's destruction has become equally legendary. Popular accounts often describe a single catastrophic fire that eliminates every scroll in one dramatic moment. Modern scholarship paints a much more complex picture. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars continue debating exactly how the library declines. Julius Caesar's military campaign in Alexandria during the 1st century before the Common Era almost certainly results in fire affecting parts of the city. Some ancient sources suggest that warehouses storing books may have been damaged, though the precise extent remains uncertain. Later political conflicts changing imperial priorities, economic pressures and religious transformations likely contribute additional losses over several centuries. Rather than disappearing instantly, the institution probably experiences a gradual erosion. Collections are damaged, dispersed, relocated, or neglected. Buildings fall into disrepair. Successive crises weaken the scholarly community that once animated its halls. By the time later generations speak of Alexandria's lost greatness, much of the decline has already unfolded over hundreds of years. This gradual disappearance offers an important lesson. Civilizations do not lose knowledge only through spectacular disasters. They also lose it through indifference. Elsewhere across the ancient world, similar patterns unfold. In Mesopotamia, royal archives are abandoned when capitals shift. Clay tablets survive only because collapsed buildings accidentally protect them beneath layers of debris. Organic writing materials vanish almost completely. In Greece, countless tragedies, philosophical works, scientific treatises, and historical narratives disappear because later generations stop copying them. Of the hundreds of plays composed by major dramatists, only a small fraction survive into the present. The mathematics of Archimedes provides a remarkable example of both loss and survival. Many of his writings vanish entirely. Others remain known only through references by later authors. One extraordinary manuscript, later called the Archimedes Palimpsest, narrowly escapes complete disappearance. During the Middle Ages, valuable parchment is reused by scraping away earlier writing and copying religious texts over the faded surface. For centuries, the original scientific works remain effectively invisible. Only modern imaging techniques reveal the hidden layers beneath the later manuscript. Multispectral photography allows scholars to recover previously unreadable portions of Archimedes' work, exposing sophisticated mathematical reasoning centuries ahead of its time. Without this accidental survival beneath another text, significant aspects of ancient mathematics might have remained permanently unknown. Fire, however, remains one of history's most relentless enemies of written knowledge. Unlike clay tablets, which sometimes become stronger when accidentally baked, papyrus and parchment are extraordinarily vulnerable. Entire monastic libraries vanish through accidental sparks. Palace archives disappear during sieges. Temple collections burn when cities are captured. Yet even here, history often refuses to be entirely erased. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 of the Common Era destroys the Roman town of Herculaneum beneath volcanic material. Among the buried buildings stands a luxurious residence now known as the Villa of the Papyri. Inside, hundreds of scrolls are carbonized by intense heat. At first glance, they appear hopelessly ruined. For centuries, attempts to open them frequently cause further damage. The blackened scrolls crumble at the slightest touch. Many scholars assume their contents are lost forever. Modern technology changes that assumption dramatically. Using advanced imaging methods, researchers begin reading the ink hidden within tightly rolled scrolls without physically unrolling them. Tiny differences in material density reveal letters invisible to ordinary examination. Artificial intelligence assists in reconstructing damaged passages. Every successful reading represents a voice rescued from nearly 2,000 years of silence. The discoveries continue today. Each newly deciphered section reminds historians that entire philosophical works, literary compositions, or scientific discussions may still remain concealed within unopened scrolls. The library destroyed by volcanic catastrophe becomes paradoxically one of archaeology's greatest opportunities. Knowledge is also lost through language itself. As civilizations change, fewer people understand older scripts. Even if manuscripts physically survive, they become inaccessible once readers disappear. During periods of political fragmentation, educational systems weaken. Professional scribes decline in number. Libraries preserve books that almost no one can interpret. Eventually, neglected manuscripts decay because no community remains capable of appreciating their importance. Religious institutions often become unexpected guardians against this process. Monasteries across Europe painstakingly copy classical texts during the medieval period. Islamic scholars preserve and expand upon Greek philosophy, mathematics, medicine and astronomy while translating works into Arabic. Byzantine scribes continue reproducing ancient manuscripts long after the Western Roman Empire collapses. These parallel traditions prove essential. Many works known today survive only because multiple civilizations value them at different moments in history. A philosophical text copied in Athens may later be preserved in Constantinople, translated in Baghdad, and eventually reintroduced to Western Europe centuries afterward. The survival of knowledge depends not upon one culture alone, but upon an intricate chain of preservation stretching across languages, religions, and continents. No single explanation fully accounts for why some texts endure while countless others vanish forever. Chance plays an undeniable role. Climate matters, political stability matters, individual decisions matter. An anonymous monk choosing to copy one manuscript instead of another may unknowingly determine which ideas reach the modern world. The shelves of every lost library therefore represent more than missing books. They represent missing conversations, forgotten discoveries, abandoned debates, and lives whose thoughts disappear without leaving another trace. Every surviving manuscript becomes precious not because it is complete, but because it has escaped an overwhelming tide of destruction that has carried away the vast majority of humanity's written memory. When ancient people explain the origins of mountains, the fury of floods, the arrival of winter, or the collapse of mighty kingdoms, they rarely separate history from symbolism. Their stories weave together memory, belief, observation, and imagination into narratives that are passed from one generation to the next. For centuries, scholars often dismiss these myths as little more than colourful fiction. Yet modern archaeology, geology, and anthropology have gradually revealed a more nuanced picture. While myths cannot be treated as straightforward historical records, they sometimes preserve remarkably distant echoes of real landscapes, real disasters, and real human experiences. The challenge lies in distinguishing symbolic meaning from historical memory. A myth is not a newspaper report. It changes as it is retold. Different communities adapt it to their own circumstances. Religious traditions reshape older narratives. Heroes replace earlier figures. Local geography becomes woven into universal themes. Even so, beneath these layers, certain details occasionally prove surprisingly consistent with physical evidence preserved in the earth itself. Perhaps no ancient story has inspired more debate than the great flood traditions found across many civilizations. Mesopotamian literature preserves some of the oldest surviving examples. Long before the familiar biblical account is written, Sumerian and later Babylonian texts describe overwhelming floods sent by the gods, a chosen survivor, the construction of a vessel, the preservation of life, and the eventual return to dry land. The Epic of Gilgamesh contains one of the best-known versions. Within its broader exploration of kingship mortality and the search for immortality, the hero encounters Utnapishtim, who recounts surviving a catastrophic deluge. The similarities between this narrative and later traditions have fascinated scholars for generations. Modern geology offers no evidence for a single worldwide flood covering every mountain on Earth within the span described by these stories. Such claims remain unsupported by the scientific record. Yet this does not mean the narratives are entirely disconnected from historical reality. The evidence suggests that the ancient peoples of Mesopotamia inhabit one of the most flood-prone regions in the world. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers periodically overflow with devastating force. Entire settlements can be destroyed. Agricultural land disappears beneath water. Communities rebuild again and again across centuries. Archaeological excavations at several sites reveal flood deposits separating different phases of occupation. Scholars still debate whether particular flood traditions preserve memories of one, especially severe regional disaster, or represent generations of accumulated experience combined into a single dramatic narrative. No single explanation fully accounts for every version. What seems increasingly likely is that repeated encounters with destructive flooding shape cultural memory so deeply that these events become central to religious and literary tradition. A similar relationship between myth and landscape appears around the Eastern Mediterranean. Ancient Greek stories frequently describe islands rising from the sea cities, destroyed by divine anger and violent struggles between earth and ocean. For centuries, these tales are interpreted primarily as symbolic expressions of divine power. Then geology begins uncovering evidence of enormous volcanic eruptions and tsunamis affecting Bronze Age civilizations. The eruption of Thera on the island now known as Santorini ranks among the largest volcanic events of the ancient world. It sends ash high into the atmosphere, generates powerful tsunamis, and dramatically reshapes the island itself. Archaeological evidence demonstrates that nearby civilizations, including the Minoans of Crete, experienced significant disruption during this period. Some researchers have proposed connections between this catastrophe and later legends, including aspects of the story of Atlantis described by Plato many centuries afterward. Most historians remain cautious. Plato almost certainly constructs Atlantis primarily as a philosophical narrative rather than a literal historical account. Even so, scholars acknowledge that memories of real natural disasters may influence later storytelling traditions. The evidence remains suggestive rather than conclusive. Earthquakes likewise leave lasting impressions upon cultural memory. Along active fault lines throughout the Mediterranean and Near East, ancient cities repeatedly experienced destruction, followed by reconstruction. Stories describing gods shaking the earth or mountains splitting apart often reflect societies intimately familiar with seismic activity. Modern archaeology frequently confirms repeated earthquake damage at locations associated with such traditions. Volcanic landscapes inspire similar narratives. The smoking summit of Mount Etna becomes the legendary workshop of Hephaestus. Volcanic islands throughout the Aegean generate stories of imprisoned giants and subterranean fires. These myths do not explain volcanism scientifically, but they preserve accurate observations of landscapes whose dramatic behaviour demands explanation. Not all myths concern natural disasters. Some preserve memories of migration and cultural change. Across the Pacific, Polynesian oral traditions recount remarkable voyages between distant islands, guided only by stars' ocean currents, bird behaviour and wave patterns. For many years, some outside observers underestimate these accounts, assuming such journeys are impossible without modern navigation. Experimental voyages using traditional Polynesian techniques demonstrate otherwise. Skilled navigators successfully cross immense stretches of open ocean using methods preserved through oral tradition. Archaeological and genetic evidence increasingly supports the extraordinary achievements described in these narratives. Here, myth memory and lived experience intertwine rather than contradict one another. Australian Aboriginal traditions provide another remarkable example of long-term cultural memory. Certain stories describe coastlines, rivers and islands that correspond closely with landscapes existing thousands of years ago, before post-glacial sea level rise transforms the continent's shoreline. Scholars continue investigating these traditions, carefully recognizing both their cultural significance and their potential to preserve remarkably ancient environmental knowledge. The possibility that oral traditions retain memories spanning many millennia remains an area of active research. The evidence is still developing, and interpretations vary. Nevertheless, these studies encourage historians to approach traditional narratives with greater respect than earlier generations sometimes afforded them. Myths also preserve memories of vanished animals. Ancient stories featuring enormous serpents, giant birds, or unusual creatures occasionally invite speculation about encounters with extinct species or fossil discoveries. Most such interpretations remain highly speculative and require caution. Human imagination readily creates fantastic beings without requiring direct inspiration from prehistoric life. Yet there are intriguing exceptions. Fossils exposed naturally through erosion have undoubtedly been encountered by ancient peoples. Large bones emerging from hillsides or riverbanks almost certainly stimulate stories about giants, dragons, or legendary beasts. While direct evidence linking specific myths to particular fossils remains limited, the possibility illustrates how observations of the natural world continually influence storytelling. What survives in the record suggests that ancient myths function less as literal chronicles than as cultural containers. They preserve emotional truths, environmental experience, social values, historical memories, and collective identity simultaneously. Attempting to classify them as either entirely factual or entirely fictional misses their true complexity. Modern researchers therefore approach these traditions through multiple disciplines at once. Archaeologists examine settlement patterns. Geologists study sediment layers and volcanic deposits. Linguists trace the evolution of stories across languages. Anthropologists explore how oral traditions adapt while preserving core themes. Together, these approaches reveal narratives far richer than any single field could uncover alone. The greatest lesson offered by ancient myths may be that memory survives in many different forms. Some civilizations carve history into stone, others impress it into clay or brush it onto papyrus. Still others carry it through countless generations of storytellers whose voices leave no written record at all. Whether preserved in a temple archive, a carbonized scroll, or a tale repeated beneath the stars, each tradition reflects humanity's enduring effort to understand a world shaped by both ordinary experience and extraordinary events. Somewhere between history and imagination, the ancient texts continue whispering clues that modern science is only beginning to hear. Even after centuries of excavation, translation, and careful scholarship, there remain manuscripts that refuse to surrender their secrets. Some are written in languages that no one has identified. Others survive only in damaged fragments too incomplete to reconstruct with confidence. A few seem so unusual that they inspire decades of speculation extending far beyond the evidence itself. These enigmatic works occupy a curious place between history and mystery. They invite imagination, yet they also demand extraordinary restraint from those who seek to understand them. Among the most famous of these puzzles is the manuscript now known as the Voynich manuscript. Unlike many ancient texts discussed by historians, it does not belong to the distant civilizations of Egypt or Mesopotamia, but to the late medieval world. Even so, its enduring mystery illustrates many of the same challenges that confront scholars studying far older writings. The manuscript contains hundreds of pages filled with elegant illustrations of unfamiliar plants, astronomical diagrams, bathing figures, and a script unlike any confidently identified language. Radiocarbon dating indicates that the parchment itself originates during the early 15th century. This places the physical material firmly within a historical context, even though its purpose remains uncertain. For more than a century, linguists, cryptographers, historians, computer scientists, and amateur enthusiasts have attempted to decipher its writing. Some believe it conceals a genuine language encoded through an elaborate cipher. Others suggest it may represent an artificial language created for a specialized audience. A few have argued that it is an elaborate hoax, though statistical analyses increasingly indicate that the text possesses internal structure more consistent with meaningful language than with random invention. Scholars still debate every major aspect of the manuscript. No proposed decipherment has gained broad acceptance within the academic community. The evidence remains incomplete, reminding researchers that the existence of a mysterious text does not automatically imply the existence of hidden knowledge waiting to be dramatically revealed. Sometimes the mystery itself is the most honest conclusion. Another remarkable document, though very different in character, continues to challenge interpretation. The Phaistos disc, discovered on the island of Crete in the early 20th century, consists of a circular clay object impressed with carefully stamped symbols arranged in a spiral pattern. Unlike ordinary inscriptions carved individually by hand, each symbol appears to have been produced using reusable stamps, making it one of the earliest known examples of repeated printing techniques. Its uniqueness creates both fascination and frustration. No comparable document has yet been discovered. Without additional examples determining whether the symbols represent a writing system, a ritual object, a game, or something entirely different, becomes extraordinarily difficult. Some researchers suggest connections with Bronze Age scripts found elsewhere in the Eastern Mediterranean. Others argue that the disc may represent a distinct tradition altogether. Because the surviving evidence consists of only a single artifact, scholars exercise considerable caution. Extraordinary claims based upon isolated discoveries have often failed under closer examination, and the history of archaeology encourages patience over speculation. Far older mysteries emerge from fragments whose incompleteness rather than uniqueness limits interpretation. Archaeologists frequently recover burned scrolls, broken tablets, or water-damaged manuscripts preserving only scattered words. A single surviving sentence may hint at an entire lost literary tradition without providing enough information to reconstruct it. Imagine discovering one torn page from an unknown novel thousands of years in the future. The names of several characters remain visible. References to distant cities appear alongside fragments of conversation. Yet everything connecting those moments has vanished. Historians regularly face precisely this situation when working with damaged ancient texts. The Dead Sea Scrolls illustrate both the promise and the limitations of fragmentary evidence. Discovered in caves near the Dead Sea beginning in the mid-20th century, these manuscripts include biblical texts, religious commentaries, legal writings, hymns, calendars, and community regulations dating roughly from the 3rd century before the Common Era to the 1st century of the Common Era. Although many scrolls survive remarkably well, countless others consist of tiny fragments. Scholars spend decades matching pieces according to handwriting, parchment characteristics, fiber patterns, ink composition, and textual content. Advances in digital imaging and artificial intelligence continue assisting this painstaking reconstruction, but many gaps remain impossible to fill with certainty. What survives in the record nevertheless transforms understanding of Jewish religious life during the Second Temple period. Variations among biblical manuscripts reveal a textual tradition more diverse than previously assumed. Community rules illuminate the beliefs of groups scarcely mentioned elsewhere. The discoveries demonstrate how even incomplete collections can reshape historical understanding. Carbonized manuscripts present another extraordinary challenge. Fire often appears to destroy written knowledge completely, yet in certain circumstances it preserves documents in an unreadable state, rather than reducing them to ash. The scrolls recovered from Herculaneum remain among the best-known examples, but similar problems arise elsewhere whenever heat transforms organic writing materials into fragile carbon. Until recently, opening such scrolls physically risked destroying them forever. Today, sophisticated imaging techniques allow researchers to peer inside without unrolling the manuscript itself. X-ray tomography creates detailed three-dimensional models of the tightly wound layers. Artificial intelligence identifies faint traces of ink, almost invisible within the carbonized material. These methods are still evolving, but their potential is extraordinary. Entire works believed permanently inaccessible may gradually become readable without causing additional damage. Each successful reconstruction reminds historians that technological innovation can dramatically alter what appears possible in the study of ancient texts. Not every mystery concerns undeciphered language. Some involve uncertain authorship. Ancient manuscripts often circulate anonymously or under the names of famous individuals whose reputations lend authority to the work. Determining whether a text genuinely originates with its attributed author requires careful comparison of language-style historical references and manuscript tradition. This practice should not always be understood as deliberate forgery. Ancient concepts of authorship differ significantly from modern expectations. Students continue expanding the teachings of respected masters. Schools preserve traditions under established names. Later editors combine earlier materials into unified collections. The boundaries between original composition, faithful transmission, and creative adaptation are often difficult to define. Forgery, however, certainly exists. Throughout history, valuable manuscripts inspire imitation. Some are created for financial gain, others seek political or religious influence. Modern scientific techniques including ink analysis, parchment dating, pigment examination, and microscopic study of writing surfaces have become invaluable tools for identifying questionable documents. Scholars remain especially cautious whenever sensational claims accompany newly discovered manuscripts. History contains numerous examples in which extraordinary announcements initially attract widespread attention, before careful analysis reveals more ordinary explanations. The discipline has therefore developed a healthy skepticism grounded not in cynicism but in experience. Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of these enigmatic texts is what they reveal about the limits of historical knowledge. Modern civilization often assumes that every important mystery will eventually be solved through enough research and technological progress. Ancient manuscripts suggest otherwise. Some texts may never be deciphered because too little evidence survives. Others may remain incomplete forever because missing fragments have long since decayed beyond recovery. Certain languages may have disappeared without leaving enough clues for reconstruction. Accepting these limitations does not diminish scholarship. Instead, it reflects intellectual honesty. The greatest historians are often those most willing to acknowledge uncertainty. They distinguish carefully between evidence and inference, between possibility and probability. In doing so, they preserve the integrity of the past rather than forcing it to provide answers it can no longer give. These stubbornly mysterious manuscripts therefore serve an important purpose beyond the information they contain. They remind humanity that history is not a finished book waiting to be read from beginning to end. It is a vast collection of surviving fragments separated by silence, chance, and time. Some pages remain wonderfully clear, others are faded almost beyond recognition. And somewhere, perhaps beneath an unexplored ruin, or inside a forgotten cave, countless additional voices still wait in darkness, their stories preserved but not yet understood. For most of history, recovering the words hidden inside damaged manuscripts depends upon remarkable patience and equally remarkable luck. Scholars examine faded ink through magnifying glasses, compare handwriting by candlelight, and spend years reconstructing shattered tablets one fragment at a time. Their work produces extraordinary results, but it is limited by what the human eye can actually see. Countless texts remain locked behind stains, burns, faded pigments, and physical damage that appear impossible to overcome. During the past few decades, however, an unexpected partnership has begun transforming this ancient challenge. Archaeology and history are increasingly joined by physics, chemistry, computer science, and artificial intelligence, allowing forgotten voices to emerge from manuscripts once considered unreadable. One of the most important developments comes from multispectral imaging. At first glance, the technique seems almost deceptively simple. Instead of photographing a manuscript under ordinary visible light, researchers captured dozens of images using different wavelengths ranging from ultraviolet through visible light and into the infrared spectrum. Different materials respond differently at each wavelength. Ink invisible under normal conditions may suddenly appear dark and distinct when illuminated in another part of the spectrum. The results can be astonishing. Letters that seem completely erased often emerge with remarkable clarity. Water stains disappear while hidden writing becomes legible. Marginal notes overlooked for centuries suddenly reveal themselves. Entire passages thought permanently lost reappear without requiring a single physical alteration to the manuscript itself. This technology has transformed the study of medieval palimpsests manuscripts, in which older writing has been deliberately scraped away so expensive parchment can be reused. For generations, historians know that countless ancient works disappear beneath later religious or administrative texts. Recovering them proves nearly impossible because the original ink survives only in microscopic traces embedded within the parchment. Modern imaging changes the assumption. By carefully analyzing subtle differences in reflected light, researchers reveal underlying texts while leaving the manuscript completely unharmed. Philosophical treatises, mathematical works, biblical commentaries, and classical literature begin emerging from beneath pages that appear blank to the naked eye. Every recovered line represents knowledge rescued from what once seems irreversible loss. Equally transformative is the application of X-ray imaging to carbonized scrolls. The scrolls buried during the eruption of Mount Vesuvius remain among archaeology's greatest frustrations for more than 2 centuries. Their surfaces are so fragile that physically unrolling them risks complete destruction. Early attempts often succeed only in reducing priceless manuscripts to scattered fragments. Today, scientists approach the problem differently. Instead of opening the scrolls, they create detailed three-dimensional scans of their internal structure using powerful X-ray techniques. Every tightly wound layer becomes visible inside the digital model. Sophisticated software then performs what researchers call virtual unwrapping, gradually flattening the rolled surfaces without ever touching the original object. The process is extraordinarily demanding. Ancient scrolls are rarely rolled evenly. Layers press against one another, tear-fold and distort under intense heat. Reconstructing their original arrangement requires immense computational power, combined with careful human interpretation. Artificial intelligence has recently become an invaluable partner in this effort. Machine learning systems trained to recognize subtle variations in texture can identify microscopic differences between ink and carbonized papyrus that human observers often overlook. What appears to be an entirely black surface may actually contain faint patterns corresponding to ancient handwriting. As these systems improve, more hidden letters become recognizable. Several remarkable breakthroughs have already demonstrated the potential of this approach. Previously unreadable portions of Herculaneum scrolls have begun yielding words, phrases, and even extended passages without any physical intervention. Although the work remains ongoing, researchers increasingly believe that hundreds of unopened scrolls may eventually become readable. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that this buried library contains primarily philosophical works associated with the Epicurean tradition. Yet scholars remain hopeful that future discoveries could include entirely unknown literary compositions, historical accounts, or scientific writings. The evidence remains incomplete, but every successful reading expands the possibilities. Artificial intelligence contributes in another equally important way: reconstruction. Ancient manuscripts rarely survive intact. Clay tablets break into dozens or even hundreds of fragments scattered across excavation sites or museums around the world. Traditionally, scholars compare these pieces, manually searching for matching edges, handwriting styles, and textual content. Digital systems now accelerate this painstaking process dramatically. Three-dimensional scanning records every contour of a fragment with microscopic precision. Algorithms compare thousands of broken edges, simultaneously identifying potential matches that might otherwise require decades of manual examination. Human specialists still make the final judgment, but technology dramatically narrows the search. The same principles apply to fragmented inscriptions carved into stone. Weather gradually erodes surfaces until individual letters become almost impossible to distinguish. Reflectance, transformation. Imaging, often abbreviated as RT, allows researchers to illuminate inscriptions from multiple angles while preserving detailed information about surface texture. Tiny chisel marks, invisible under ordinary lighting, become surprisingly clear within interactive digital models. This technique has revealed forgotten names, damaged legal clauses, and previously unnoticed corrections carved by ancient stoneworkers. Even monuments studied for generations continue producing new information, once viewed through modern methods. Chemical analysis offers another remarkable window into ancient texts. Ink itself preserves valuable evidence. By examining its elemental composition, researchers identify different workshops, production methods, and periods of manuscript creation. Variations in pigment sometimes reveal later additions or corrections inserted centuries after the original document is written. Similarly, parchment preserves biological information impossible to imagine only a few decades ago. Tiny fragments of DNA extracted from animal skins reveal whether pages originate from sheep, goats, calves, or other species. Protein analysis identifies manufacturing techniques and regional traditions. Even microscopic traces of pollen or dust trapped within manuscripts occasionally preserve clues about the environments through which the documents have traveled. Perhaps most surprising of all is the emerging ability to identify individual scribes. Every person develops subtle habits while writing. The spacing between letters, the pressure applied to the stylus, preferred stroke sequences, and countless tiny movements collectively create distinctive patterns. Machine learning systems analyzing thousands of characters can sometimes distinguish between different scribes working within the same archive, even when their handwriting appears nearly identical to human observers. This capability opens fascinating historical possibilities. Administrative tablets once attributed to anonymous offices can increasingly be connected to particular individuals. Researchers begin tracing careers spanning decades as experienced scribes train younger colleagues, change writing habits with age, or move between government departments. The immense bureaucracies of ancient kingdoms gradually reveal the human personalities working quietly behind official documents. Technology is also transforming collaboration itself. High-resolution digital archives allow scholars separated by continents to examine the same manuscript simultaneously. Museums share detailed scans rather than transporting fragile originals across the world. Researchers compare collections once isolated by geography, discovering joins between fragments housed in different countries for generations. No single laboratory could accomplish this work alone. Historians consult physicists, archaeologists collaborate with computer scientists, linguists work alongside engineers, conservators advise software developers. The recovery of ancient texts has become one of the most interdisciplinary scientific endeavors of the modern age. Yet perhaps the greatest achievement of these technologies lies not in replacing traditional scholarship, but in extending it. A computer may identify faint ink patterns, but it cannot fully understand the historical significance of a newly recovered sentence. Artificial intelligence may reconstruct damaged letters, yet it cannot independently evaluate cultural context, literary style, political nuance, or religious symbolism. Human expertise remains indispensable. The partnership between ancient manuscripts and modern science therefore represents something profoundly hopeful. Thousands of years after anonymous scribes carefully press symbols into wet clay brush ink across papyrus, or carve words into stone, new generations continue developing entirely unforeseen methods to hear them again. Every technological breakthrough narrows the silence just a little further, revealing that the past is far from finished speaking. Hidden beneath burned pages, faded ink, broken tablets, and forgotten ruins, countless voices still wait patiently for the next discovery capable of bringing them back into the light. For every ancient manuscript resting safely inside a museum, there are countless others that remain hidden beneath layers of earth, trapped inside collapsed buildings, sealed within caves, buried beneath expanding cities, or slowly dissolving in environments where time shows little mercy. Archaeologists often describe the historical record as incomplete, but even that phrase understates the reality. The overwhelming majority of everything humanity has ever written has almost certainly disappeared. What survives is not a representative sample of the past. It is the small and unpredictable fraction that chance allows history to keep. This realization has transformed archaeological thinking during the past century. Earlier generations sometimes imagined that the greatest discoveries had already been made. The Great Pyramids were known. The ruins of Mesopotamia had been identified. Classical cities filled museum collections. It seemed reasonable to assume that the broad outline of ancient civilization was largely complete. Again and again, the Earth proved otherwise. Every decade has produced discoveries that fundamentally reshape accepted history. Entire cities emerge beneath farmland. Royal tombs are uncovered where no one expected them. Forgotten archives appear beneath palace floors. Remote caves preserve manuscripts untouched since antiquity. Ancient shipwrecks reveal commercial worlds previously invisible to historians. The deeper researchers look, the clearer it becomes that enormous portions of humanity's written heritage still remain beyond reach. One reason is surprisingly simple. Most archaeological sites have never been excavated. Excavation is expensive, slow, and irreversible. Once a site has been excavated, it can never be returned to its original condition. Modern archaeologists therefore proceed with extraordinary caution, often leaving large portions untouched until future generations possess better techniques. In many famous ancient cities, only a small percentage of the total area has actually been investigated. The buried archives of tomorrow may already be known to exist. Researchers simply choose not to disturb them yet. Elsewhere, entire sites remain undiscovered because they lie beneath modern settlements. Human civilization has a remarkable habit of rebuilding in the same favourable locations. Rivers provide water, harbours encourage trade, fertile plains support agriculture. As ancient cities decline, later communities often construct directly above them. The result is a layered landscape in which thousands of years of occupation accumulate one upon another. Beneath modern streets may rest Roman buildings. Beneath Roman foundations may lie Bronze Age settlements. Beneath those may survive even older Neolithic communities. Reaching the deepest layers often requires navigating active cities, where excavation opportunities are necessarily limited. Urban archaeology therefore advances in unexpected ways. Construction projects for subway systems, office buildings, or utilities occasionally expose forgotten structures. Rescue archaeologists work rapidly before development continues. Sometimes these brief investigations uncover extraordinary discoveries, inscriptions preserving unknown officials, archives documenting local administration or private collections hidden beneath collapsed homes. Even environments once considered inaccessible are beginning to reveal their secrets. Dense tropical forests long conceal ancient settlements beneath vegetation almost impossible to penetrate from the ground. Traditional surveys identify only scattered monuments, while vast surrounding landscapes remain invisible. The introduction of airborne laser scanning, commonly known as LiDAR, changes this dramatically. By sending millions of laser pulses through forest canopies, researchers generate detailed models of the ground beneath the trees. Entire cities emerge where dense jungle previously hides every trace of human construction. Roads, terraces, reservoirs, defensive walls, and ceremonial complexes become visible across enormous areas. Although LiDAR cannot reveal buried manuscripts directly, it identifies settlements where written records may still survive beneath collapsed buildings. Every newly discovered urban centre expands the search for archives capable of transforming historical understanding. The deserts of Egypt, the Arabian Peninsula, and Central Asia continue offering equally remarkable possibilities. Dry climates preserve organic materials far better than humid environments. Countless ancient settlements remain buried beneath drifting sand. Caravan routes shift over centuries, abandoning way stations that disappear almost completely from view. Satellite imagery has become one of archaeology's most valuable tools in these regions. Slight variations in soil color, vegetation growth, or surface texture often indicate buried walls invisible from ground level. Ancient canals appear as faint lines stretching across modern landscapes. Forgotten cemeteries emerge through subtle topographical patterns. Every image examined from space carries the possibility of identifying another place where ancient texts still wait beneath the surface. Caves present another extraordinary opportunity. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls demonstrates how isolated environments can preserve manuscripts for more than 2,000 years. Similar conditions exist in numerous regions across the world. Limestone cave systems, volcanic shelters, and high-altitude refuges have all served as places of storage, worship, refuge, or burial. Many remain unexplored, not because archaeologists lack interest, but because remote locations, difficult terrain, Legal protections and conservation concerns require careful planning. The preservation of fragile manuscripts often depends upon maintaining stable environmental conditions. Rushing to recover them can sometimes cause greater damage than leaving them temporarily undisturbed. Underwater archaeology has expanded the search into entirely different environments. Ancient ports now submerged beneath rising seas occasionally preserve wooden structures, cargoes and inscriptions rarely surviving on land. Shipwrecks act as sealed capsules preserving commercial documents, writing tablets and trade goods exactly where they are lost centuries earlier. The famous Antikythera shipwreck, although better known for its extraordinary mechanical device, reminds historians that maritime discoveries frequently challenge long-held assumptions about ancient technology, commerce, and intellectual exchange. As underwater exploration techniques improve, researchers continue investigating coastlines altered by post-glacial sea level rise. Entire prehistoric landscapes now lie beneath shallow seas. Communities living along ancient coastlines leave camp settlements and perhaps written materials that disappear beneath rising water thousands of years ago. Organic preservation underwater can sometimes exceed expectations, particularly where oxygen levels remain low. Scholars still debate how many submerged archaeological sites await discovery worldwide. The number is almost certainly immense. Political circumstances also shape what remains hidden. Some regions containing extraordinary archaeological potential remain inaccessible because of ongoing conflict, instability, or legal restrictions. Excavation must often wait until conditions allow responsible research and conservation. Meanwhile, looting poses an equally serious threat. Illegal excavation destroys context even when artifacts survive. A manuscript removed without recording its precise location loses much of its historical value. Archaeologists do not study objects alone. They study relationships: which room contains the archive, which buildings surround it, what other materials lie nearby, how the layers accumulate through time. Without that context, countless questions become impossible to answer. Climate change introduces new urgency. Melting glaciers expose artifacts preserved for millennia. Thawing permafrost reveals organic materials previously locked in frozen ground. At the same time, rising temperatures, increasing humidity, stronger storms, and coastal erosion threaten archaeological sites that have remained stable for centuries. Researchers now face difficult decisions about which locations require immediate attention before irreversible damage occurs. No civilization could have anticipated these challenges. The anonymous scribes who carefully copied scrolls, impressed tablets into clay, or stored archives within temple walls assumed future generations would inherit their work under conditions they understood. Instead, their writings passed through invasions, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, religious transformation, environmental change, and simple chance. What survives today represents only a tiny conversation across an immense silence. And yet every year that conversation grows. A newly excavated archive, a forgotten inscription beneath plaster, a damaged manuscript recovered through modern imaging, a buried city revealed beneath forest or desert. Each discovery reminds humanity that history remains unfinished. Somewhere beneath our feet, perhaps only a few meters below an ordinary field beneath the foundations of a modern building, or inside a cave whose entrance has long been hidden by falling rock, ancient texts may still be waiting. Their authors could never have imagined the world that would one day seek them. But if those voices endure, even in fragments, they hold the power to change once again how humanity understands its own distant beginnings. Every surviving ancient text carries two stories at once. The first is the story written upon its surface, the law proclaimed by a king, the prayer whispered by a priest, the calculations of a merchant, the observations of an astronomer, or the reflections of a philosopher. The second story is quieter but no less extraordinary. It is the story of survival itself. Every crack in a clay tablet, every faded line of ink, every missing corner of a scroll records the countless chances that allowed one fragile object to outlive the civilization that created it. Across the past several thousand years, empires have risen with absolute confidence that their achievements would endure forever. Palaces have been built from stone intended to resist eternity. Libraries have gathered knowledge from distant lands. Scribes have copied manuscripts with painstaking care, believing they were preserving truth for generations yet unborn. Most of those expectations have not survived. Kingdoms have disappeared. Languages have fallen silent. Cities have become fields. Rivers have shifted course. Forests have reclaimed temples. The overwhelming majority of everything ever written has vanished without leaving a recognizable trace. Yet scattered fragments remain, and together they possess an influence far greater than their modest physical form might suggest. The modern understanding of ancient civilization is continually reshaped by these fragments. A newly translated inscription may alter the chronology of an entire dynasty. A merchant's letter can reveal commercial routes extending hundreds of kilometers beyond previous estimates. A forgotten legal contract may demonstrate unexpected social rights enjoyed by women in a particular region. A damaged astronomical record may refine the dating of historical events by decades. No single discovery usually transforms history on its own. Instead, knowledge advances through accumulation. Thousands of small observations gradually replace older assumptions. Archaeologists compare pottery with inscriptions. Historians integrate environmental evidence with written records. Linguists reconstruct forgotten vocabulary. Chemists identify ancient pigments. Physicists reveal erased manuscripts. Computer scientists reconnect scattered fragments. Every discipline contributes another piece to a puzzle that can never be entirely complete. This incompleteness is not a weakness of history. It is one of its greatest strengths. Unlike mythology presented as certainty or legend repeated without question, historical understanding grows by acknowledging its own limitations. Scholars distinguish carefully between what is firmly supported, what is strongly suggested, and what remains uncertain. The evidence continues changing because new discoveries continue appearing. What survives in the records suggests that many of humanity's most enduring assumptions have already required revision. The earliest cities prove older than once believed. Ancient trade networks reach farther than expected. Scientific observation develops across multiple civilizations independently. Complex societies flourish in environments previously considered unsuitable. Writing itself emerges through several distinct cultural traditions rather than following a single universal pathway. Every generation inherits a richer but also more complicated picture of the ancient world. Perhaps the most remarkable lesson offered by ancient texts is not how different our ancestors are, but how familiar many of their concerns remain. Parents worry about their children. Merchants complain about delayed shipments. Officials struggle with incomplete information. Farmers watch uncertain weather. Students make mistakes while practicing difficult lessons. Physicians search for better treatments. Philosophers ask enduring questions about justice, mortality, knowledge, and happiness. Separated by thousands of years, these ordinary experiences collapse the apparent distance between past and present. The civilizations themselves may vanish, but human curiosity does not. That curiosity explains why ancient texts continue attracting extraordinary attention long after the societies that produce them disappear. Researchers devote decades to deciphering scripts whose practical value ended thousands of years ago. Archaeologists excavate beneath deserts, forests, mountains, and modern cities, searching for archives whose authors are entirely forgotten. Conservators spend years preserving a single damaged manuscript that may contain only a few readable pages. From a purely practical perspective, such efforts may appear disproportionate. Yet they reveal something essential about humanity. People seek not only to survive, but also to remember. Writing is humanity's longest conversation with the future. Every inscription, scroll, tablet, codex, and manuscript represents someone believing that an idea deserves to outlive its own moment. Sometimes that hope succeeds beyond anything its creator could have imagined. A scribe pressing wedge-shaped marks into wet clay nearly 4,000 years ago could never have conceived of satellites, digital imaging, artificial intelligence, or global museums. Yet his words may now be studied by millions of people living in a world unimaginably different from his own. There is profound humility in that realization. Modern civilization often regards itself as uniquely advanced, yet much of what is known about humanity's earliest history depends entirely upon the quiet labor of anonymous individuals who carefully copied manuscripts, organized archives, repaired damaged scrolls, and stored documents whose importance they themselves could scarcely foresee. History remembers kings more readily than scribes. Ancient texts suggest that perhaps it should not. Without the patience of generations of copyists, translators, librarians, priests, monks, scholars, merchants, and ordinary caretakers, entire civilizations would have disappeared into silence. The monuments might still stand, but their voices would be gone. Even now the conversation continues. New excavations uncover forgotten archives. Hidden writing emerges beneath damaged parchment. Artificial intelligence assists in reading scrolls sealed since antiquity. Remote sensing identifies cities still buried beneath forest and desert. Every discovery reminds humanity that the past is not fixed. It expands whenever another surviving voice is recovered from beneath the weight of time. The greatest secret hidden inside ancient texts is therefore not a lost prophecy, an impossible technology, or a forgotten empire waiting to rewrite history overnight. It is something quieter. It is the realization that civilization has always been built upon memory, and memory survives only because countless ordinary people choose generation after generation to preserve it. The clay tablets, faded, papyri-carved stones, burned scrolls, and weathered manuscripts that remain today are not merely relics of vanished worlds. They are bridges. Across thousands of years, they allow one civilization to recognize another, not as strangers separated by impossible distances, but as fellow human beings who look toward an uncertain future and hope that someone someday would still be listening. As the centuries settle once more into silence, the ruins remain where they have always been. Desert winds continue moving across abandoned temples. Rivers flow past cities whose names survive only in broken inscriptions. Beneath quiet hills, forgotten archives still rest in darkness, undisturbed by the passing of kingdoms, religions, and languages. The ancient texts that have reached the present are only a handful of voices from an immeasurably larger chorus. Most have disappeared forever, carried away by fire, water, decay, conflict, or the simple passage of time. Yet the fragments that endure remind us that history is never made entirely of emperors and battles. It is also made of teachers patiently instructing students, merchants, balancing accounts, physicians recording remedies, astronomers watching the night sky, and scribes carefully shaping words they hope will outlive them. Every recovered manuscript expands humanity's memory just a little further. Every undeciphered script reminds us that there are still mysteries worth approaching with patience rather than certainty. Every damaged scroll recovered from beneath ash or sand offers another chance to hear a voice that nearly vanished forever. The landscapes themselves continue changing just as they always have. Seas advance and retreat. Forests grow where cities once stood. Deserts cover ancient roads. New generations walk above forgotten foundations without realizing how many stories sleep beneath their feet. Perhaps that is the enduring lesson hidden within these ancient texts. Civilizations are fragile. Libraries can burn, languages can disappear, even the greatest empires eventually fade into history. Yet the human desire to remember, to understand, and to leave something behind proves remarkably resilient. Across thousands of years, that quiet determination links anonymous scribes to modern archaeologists, ancient storytellers to contemporary historians, and forgotten readers to those who continue searching for meaning today. Somewhere beneath the earth, another unopened archive may still be waiting. Somewhere inside a damaged manuscript, invisible lines of ink may yet reveal another forgotten chapter of humanity's story. And somewhere in the silence between what has been recovered and what has been lost, the past continues waiting with extraordinary patience. The conversation is not over. It simply pauses, preserved in stone clay, papyrus parchment, and memory, until another pair of careful hands uncovers the next surviving page.